Hello and a very good morning. It's 7 o'clock. This is Mornings with me, Anna Jones. Here's how things are looking. Andy Burnham waters down prison overcrowding plans with child abusers, rapists and groomers no longer eligible for early release. But killers can still be freed. Donald Trump says Iran has one last chance to make a peace deal, accusing the regime of being duplicitous. Major retailers on London's High Street to begin using police technology to help catch shoplifters. Also ahead, we're going to be discussing the stories making headlines in today's newspapers with the paper's global affairs correspondent Molly Blackall. Plus, Sky News has given rare access to the murder investigation of a young woman who went missing 4 years ago and whose body has never been found. Hello, very good morning. Thanks so much for joining us. Our top story here today: prisoners convicted of rape, serious child sexual offences and grooming will no longer be eligible for early release as part of watered-down plans to tackle overcrowding. Adult male prisons are currently at 98% capacity. Well, the initial proposal from Keir Starmer would have allowed some of the most serious offenders to be freed if they met release conditions. However, Andy Burnham's announced that these changes are in response to public anger. In a statement, he said, "Keeping the public safe is my top priority. That's why I asked for an urgent review of the prisoner release scheme. I fully understand the anger, anxiety and distress that's been caused. I want to be honest. I wanted to go even further, as I know there will still be concerns about other offenders having their sentence shortened. But it's not possible without the prison system reaching capacity and collapsing, which would put public safety at much greater risk." Well, Molly Malone's been covering this story very closely and is here with me now. Molly, morning to you. So we knew that the early release scheme was suspended by Andy Burnham pending this review. We've now got the results of it, that there are going to be some prisoners who are exempt. What do we know about the thinking behind that decision?
Yes, as you say, this all came about because of a pause that Andy Burnham put on the policy within days of coming into office. It was, by the way, let's remember, a policy, a law that came in under Keir Starmer. It became legislation back in January, and that came about off the back of this independent review of sentencing, which was led by the former Conservative Justice Secretary, David Gauke, because this has been a problem now under successive governments. Now, what was supposed to happen as of September the 2nd was this phased release of around 6,000, 7,000 people in 10 tranches. And these were people that were going to be released, we call it early, it's an earlier point in their sentence, essentially. Some of them were going to be released after serving a third of their sentence, less dangerous criminals rather than 40%, and the more dangerous criminals were going to be released after serving half of their sentence rather than 2/3. Now, what Andy Burnham has done is put a pause on that, so that release will now happen in October rather than September, and crucially, he's excluded rapists and people that were serving sentences for serious child sex offences and grooming offences. But clearly what you have now is lots of victims sort of asking the question, what about me and why? Because those exclusions only go so far. And among them is PC Andrew Harper's family. Now, people will remember he was a police officer that was killed in the line of duty back in August 2019 after being dragged for a mile behind a car being driven by 3 men along a country road while responding to a burglary in Berkshire. Now, 2 of his killers could still qualify for early release. It's important to say one of them doesn't. He will only be eligible for release via the parole board. We've had a statement, though, from his wife, Lizzie Harper, who said, "The killers of Andrew have shown no remorse. They robbed us of our future. They are vile criminals and they should remain in jail. To release them early from their already pitiful sentence is an affront to justice. The government and the justice system have not just let me down, they have added insult to injury. They are meant to be on our side." She went on to say, "This is an utter betrayal and it's one I will not be able to forgive or forget."
Yeah, really powerful words from her, and there'll be other victims of crimes also concerned that there are still many people who will be released early. Do we know anything about the thinking behind why the government made this distinction between some prisoners and not others?
I think the reality is pragmatism, and some of it will be a numbers game, and they'll need to be looking at the numbers in prison. As you say, 98% capacity in the men's estate at the moment. Now, it's not entirely clear the numbers yet. I think we'll expect them to come out before probation start looking at the sentence recalculations, which will happen in about 10 days' time, I understand. But, I mean, they do have a capacity issue. They've had a capacity issue for a long time, and I think the perspective of the government will be there was no good option here. I mean, one prison governor said to me last night they'd usually start to see this sort of August lull as the courts start shutting down for the summer. They are just not seeing that this year. So the feeling from government, from the prison service as well, was that something had to be done. But as you say, you've now got this dividing line, if you like, between different victim groups.
And also they are saying that they're going to toughen up some of the restrictions around those prisoners once they're released, the surveillance and the tagging and all of that. But longer term, what are we looking at? I mean, they are promising that more prison places will come on stream, aren't they? But are there shorter term solutions that can be found using women's prisons, for example? There's been talk about releasing some women prisoners earlier as well. What are the other solutions that are doing the rounds?
Yeah, so that's something that as well came out of the sentencing review, and many saying, you know, some women prisoners are perhaps less dangerous. You should consider actually not prison service for them. Maybe they're going to rely much more heavily on the tagging system, but they'll need all of that to work. And at the moment, they're still sort of facing this quite immediate sort of capacity problem, and they will be kind of still looking at the numbers. But yeah, as you say, they will be relying very heavily on the tagging system. Lots of people are going to be tagged. I should also say, this isn't released early and you won't see any kind of supervision. The idea is that they will be relying very heavily on the probation service, who will need to be monitoring these offenders. And it was, in the first place, called an earned progression model, which is that if you're not behaving well in prison, if you're committing further offences, you don't get that release. But, you know, others, critics, sort of saying, actually, it's legislation. It was always going to happen anyway, because the reality is that you need to free these people early.
Molly, thanks very much indeed. We'll have lots more on this story throughout the morning, of course, but for the moment, thanks very much indeed. And a little bit later, we are going to actually hear from the Justice Secretary, Alex Norris. That's in around 10 minutes' time, where we'll talk about all of this. We're also going to be speaking to a grooming gang survivor and the Victims Commissioner for England and Wales during the programme to get their reaction to these exemptions announced this morning by the government. But now, Donald Trump has issued what he's calling a last chance for Iran to sign a peace deal. He's also accused the Iranian regime of being duplicitous after Tehran dismissed claims that they were involved in talks at all. Well, speaking in the Oval Office, Mr. Trump warned that this is the last chance for Iran to make a deal or risk escalation.
The talks are going along. We were going to hit them very hard yesterday, very, very hard, harder than any attack. I think I can say, General, from a point of knowledge, any attack since World War II, that's pretty big. This is the last chance. This is not something that, if it doesn't happen, this is the last chance for them to sign a good document.
Well, the US President was also asked about Prime Minister Andy Burnham, and President Trump said he believes the pair will have a very good relationship, but said the UK needed to do more to tackle immigration and tap into North Sea oil.
When you look at the UK, they have one of the best energy fields in the world, North Sea oil. Now, I think your new Prime Minister is going to actually open up from what I hear, I spoke to him, and he sounded terrific on this subject. But you open it up, you'll be a wealthy country. You keep it closed, you're going to be a bankrupt country, which is what you are now. Essentially, you're a bankrupt country. Look, I think we're going to have a very good relationship. We'll see. I'm not going to tell him how to run his country. But I can tell you, immigration is an incredible problem for Europe.
Well, Alex is here with me. And obviously, there's a lot of attention on how well the Prime Minister here gets on with the President. It's a really important relationship, isn't it? What clues do you think we've got from what Donald Trump has said?
Well, you're completely right about the relationship with Donald Trump, and that was seen as one of the successes of Keir Starmer's premiership, that he managed to kind of court Donald Trump and keep him on side, even through some pretty sketchy periods and disagreements. So Andy Burnham now has that challenge to look forward to. And like, the early signs seem positive. I mean, immigration and North Sea are a couple of his main bugbears about the UK. He's spoken about it a lot, and so has JD Vance, the Vice President. But in that first phone call, Donald Trump said Andy Burnham pledged to open up the North Sea. And we did see a bit of a tempering from Andy Burnham saying, you know, that he was going to be pragmatic about it, and that he acknowledged the president's arguments that people are struggling and they had this untapped resource. But, you know, what might please the president, sort of allowing more drilling in the North Sea, might not please his Labour MPs back here. And I'm already picking up a little bit of a backlash about that, with some Labour MPs worried that, you know, potentially moving forward with this sorry, I lost my train of thought. It could, what did they say, light a fire under the Greens at the exact moment that we're winning voters back from them. So there's a bit of risk there.
Yeah, within the party as well, and interesting to see how it would play with the country as well. Well, it's a relationship we're going to be watching very closely. And as you say, Donald Trump has made similar points in the past, but how often he'll come back to them, we'll have to wait and see. Alex, thanks very much indeed. Let's just bring you a little bit of breaking news, because we've just got results out from the oil giant BP. It's announced their second quarter profit has more than doubled from a year ago. And in the wake of the Iran war, the rise, of course, in the cost of oil and petrol, it's an interesting statistic. They've posted a second quarter underlying replacement cost profit, its version of net income of £5.73 billion. That's above expectations. Now it's going to be another day of pressure for the FIFA president, Gianni Infantino, as he battles to hold on to his job. This is over his failed plan to sell off stakes in the World Cup. Well, our sports correspondent Rob Harris has more.
Gianni Infantino clings on to power for now, but UEFA has instigated the next move in its attempts to bring down the FIFA president. Letters of support for his re-election are being withdrawn from across Europe. It was during the World Cup that FIFA was claiming that Infantino had 200 of the 211 World Football Associations already backing his bid for a new 4-year term as president next year. But in Europe, those letters are being withdrawn. We heard from Wales of a failure of leadership and not putting the best interests of football first. England also formally renounced its support. Serbia announced the attempts to sell off stakes in the World Cup seriously damaged the reputation and credibility of both FIFA and its president. Sweden confirmed UEFA is actively looking to come up with an alternative candidate. The deadline for candidates is in November, with the election due in March. We've heard nothing from Infantino about this increasing loss of confidence in his leadership, particularly from Europe and North America. The last statement from him was in the early hours of Saturday morning, announcing he was abandoning this attempt to launch a World Cup subsidiary with private investment after accepting it had proved too divisive. The accusation has been that he was offering this development cash to be boosted around the world as some sort of maybe incentive to gain support across the world of football. And intriguingly, just before the start of the World Cup in Mexico, when I asked Infantino about criticism of the high ticket prices, he brought up, in a way, the voting system.
I've also heard saying, well, this money just goes to the federations, to secure power or stuff like this. Well, tell me, where should the money go otherwise? Democracy is not just an empty word. And if we accept democracy, we have to accept the one member, one vote situation.
I never mentioned in the question anything about using money from the World Cup to secure votes, but it was certainly on Infantino's mind. But his presidency is now rapidly imploding. Infantino and many of his staff are facing the threat of legal action from UEFA over this attempt to launch FIFA Forward Enterprise. Officials, including Arsene Wenger, who has a senior development role, have been told that their correspondence could all be requested as part of legal action as UEFA ups the ante and tries to increase the pressure on Infantino to bring him down. This is all a concerted effort to end Infantino's presidency. But for now, he remains in power. But for how long?
Now, major retailers on London's high streets are going to begin using police technology to help catch shoplifters. Well, Graham Stothard is here to tell us a little bit more about how this is going to work. So talk us through it, Graham. How are shops getting involved here?
Well, essentially, a number of shops have written to MPs, written to the government, expressing their upset that shoplifting seems to be on the rise. Since the pandemic, there's been a real surge and there's been a real struggle to try and contain it. And this is a new way that they are trying to help bring those statistics down. At the moment, it's a trial. It's taking place across 6 boroughs of London. It's being expanded to another 7 today, though. And it essentially involves a new technology which allows shops, allows retailers to share CCTV, witness statements and other evidence directly to officers. So sometimes beforehand, police had to wait up to 28 days for CCTV. Now it can be actually just a matter of minutes. It is apparently proving quite successful, according to the Met. Normally, in cases of shoplifting, a charge or a caution is brought in around 7% of cases, less than 1 in 10. Not a lot,
No.
at all. I know it's kind of surprised me when I was reading into it. But in this trial, a charge or caution is being brought in around 30% of cases, so 1 in 3. Still not as much as people might like, sure, but a vast improvement. So it's being rolled out to shops including Tesco, Boots, Greggs. These are the bosses who have spoken out about crime. Police say a couple of examples. It helped a teenager who went on helped charge a teenager who went on a shoplifting spree worth more than £100,000. One man has been banned from every Holland and Barrett, Greggs and BP in England and Wales after stealing £4,000 worth of goods. That was made possible because of this technology. These are obviously individual cases, but the scale of the problem is staggering. It's over 500,000 cases each year. That's for the 2nd year in a row, 2024 and 2025. 2024 hit a new record. Again, that post-pandemic surge, shoppers, retailers and shops have been asking for help. This may be the police starting to find an answer.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that really angers the public, as well as, obviously, as the shop owners as well. And I guess if you've got a higher conviction rate, it's not only seen as being justice, but also the hope is that it will deter people. They think they're likely to get away with it.
Absolutely, it's that deterrent because if you... And also, if you've been banned from every single shop that you have been shoplifting from, then obviously you're not going to go ahead and do it again. So, yeah, it's deterrent as much as anything else.
Great, thanks very much indeed. Now, let's just bring you some of the other stories around this morning. And NHS staff say they've experienced a noticeable rise in racism from patients over the last 18 months. A new poll conducted by the Society of Radiographers found that staff reported being called derogatory names and patients refusing to be treated by non-white staff. They say that's led to some workers to accept racism as part of the job. A normalisation of racism in society is being blamed for the rise.
It should be surprising, but we are hearing it day in and day out. And I think it's because of what we're being fed in the media, what certain politicians are saying very publicly. I think there's been a normalisation of racism in society and in civility. People are being empowered to be racist, and they're not being held to account, they're not being dealt with. And unfortunately, it has created a culture, not just in workplaces, but in society.
Footage has emerged. At the moment, a drone crashed into a busy beach resort in southern Russia yesterday, killing 7 people. And I should say the video that we're showing you in a moment up to the strike and the aftermath. The footage shows the drone falling to the ground, followed by a loud explosion. And 3 of those killed were reported to be children, and 40 others were injured in the attack. Let's get more now on the changes to the early release scheme announced by the government. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. Well, I'm now joined by the Justice Secretary, Alex Norris, to hear more. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for coming in. So you've announced today that prisoners who committed rape, grooming or serious child sex offences will be excluded from the early release scheme for England and Wales today. Why will they stay in prison while some convicted of manslaughter or domestic violence get to walk out early?
Well, 2 years ago, we inherited a situation where we were days away from running out of prison places, which would have meant that people arrested would have been immediately bailed, would have been no place to put people who committed crimes. So over the last 2 years, we've been ramping up prison place construction, the biggest building period since the Victorian era, and we've been making important changes that are coming into effect this autumn around sentencing, where individuals may leave slightly earlier than they would have done and are then subject to very significant control periods after it. Now, as a new Justice Secretary, as a new Prime Minister, with Andy Burnham, we've looked at this because we're new into our roles and we want to do so, but also because there's been anxiety and hurt raised by victims and their families about some people who might be leaving early. So we've reviewed it very quickly. We wanted to give certainty. I'm pleased we've been able to remove rapists and child sex offenders out of it. Murderers, terrorists, people on those sentences, 18,000 are already not eligible. We would like to have gone further, but this is as far as we could go, because otherwise, without that, prison places will break down and nobody will be getting...
But how did you make the choice of who was exempted?
Well, of course, it's a difficult decision. We looked at the prison population, we looked at the people eligible for this scheme. We've had a lot of engagement. I've spoken to the Victims Commissioner, the Domestic Abuse Commissioner, and we have to draw a line somewhere. And I appreciate you, Anna, and I know that people at home may form different views, but we made the judgment that the category to prioritise were those who commit rape and those who commit child sex offence, and that's why we chose those.
And yet you've got people like the widow of PC Harper, whose case in part prompted this review, didn't it? It drew a huge amount of attention. She said that she's beyond appalled that two of her husband's killers could soon be free on the streets. She said the level of disrespect the government is showing to Andrew and other victims and to their loved ones, such as me, is beyond contempt. So what would you say to her this morning? I
mean, I understand that anger. The death of Andrew Harper shocked the nation. The individual whose driver is not subject to this, but the two other perpetrators are, because of the nature of their sentence. I know that she's angry. Frankly, the Prime Minister's expressed his anger. I would express how angry I am too at being in a situation where we're having to make significant changes that do have real impacts on people's lives, so that we are able to have a functioning prison system. And I say, Anna, if we don't, the consequences of this are, were we not to make these changes, then we would run out of prison places in this October or November. I know that's difficult. I know that's created harm, and that's none of that, it's not Lizzie Harper's fault. And, I'm sorry that she's been put into this situation as a result. I genuinely am. But this is a decision we've had to take to make sure we have a functioning prison system.
And it's not just killers that could be released early, also perpetrators of domestic violence as well. And the Domestic Abuse Commissioner has talked about this being wrong, and she says puts victims' lives at risk. She talks about individuals who are fixated on their victims and will stop at nothing rather to control and cause harm. Are you worried about reoffending?
Well, I mean, I'd want to be very clear for viewers, Anna, that this is not bog-standard licence conditions that these individuals are leaving under. They're leaving under very significant, in fact, the widest range of tools that we've ever had for probation. So there will be restrictions on where they can go. There will be restrictions on whether they can go to public events. There'll be restrictions on drugs, on alcohol, on driving. There will be a presumption on tagging, very significant controls. And then crucially, and I know the Domestic Abuse Commissioner wants to see this done properly, we will be engaging directly, individually with victims to say, what controls would you like to see so that you can live your life fully and you don't have to live around your perpetrator?
That extra surveillance is a lot of extra work. Can the probation service cope with that?
Well, absolutely, which is why we've made the £700 million investment in probation services that we are. Improving probation is a really important part of the process. We've got brilliant probation officers working hard. We're now giving them better resourcing and a wider range of tools to make sure that can take place.
You've pushed back the scheme by a month, so the first tranche will now come out in October. So how many will be released early then? Initially, the tranche was going to be about 700, so how many will it be now?
So over the 10 tranches, over 10 months, it will be 5,000 people. We're in the process of the recalculation, so I wouldn't be drawn on that number now.
So it was going to be 6,000?
It was originally meant to be
6,000.
6,000, yes, it's now 5,000. And again, for context, 4,500 people leave prison on an ordinary month. So that's the kind of scale. That's why I believe probation will be able to do their important work in terms of meeting all that workload. And, that's what's ahead of us.
So, as you say, this is all about relieving pressure on prisons. What does your modelling tell you now about when prisons will be full again, given that you've now tweaked the early release scheme?
Well, it tells us that we're out of, where the previous government got to, which is this doom loop of getting to the end, having to do emergency release schemes where individuals were let out with none of the controls that we're talking about. And, that we're now, as a result of these changes, this gives us long-term security in the prison estate.
So now, you can rule out any more early release schemes then?
We've no plans of them whatsoever. We don't need to now because of this. Now, the prison estate is a dynamic asset in terms of a single incident can cause significant demand on it. The reasons why people come, whether that's arrests, whether that's conviction, also recalls, that is fluid, and we look at that day in, day out. But making these changes today moves us away from having to make those short-term interventions, and that's why it's the right thing to do. And
you're promising more prison places, but they won't come on stream for years. So what about shorter-term solutions? Are you looking at places in women's prisons, for example, for male prisoners?
Well, I wouldn't accept that, that those are years away, because, yes...
So how soon will you get new prisons built?
Well, we've got 3,200 places, new places already online. That's of 14,000 by 2031. We're looking at all of our estate to use it innovatively. The women's
2031 is a long time off when you have a crisis now.
But they're not all then, as I say, a significant portion of them already are here. So they will come online and they will help us month on month on month. But we will, of course, look creatively at the estate. The women's estate is one of those things. It's very small, it's 4,000. And again, a significant amount of those perpetrators are violent offenders and sexual offenders. I'd want people to understand that. But where we can use our estate better, we absolutely will.
I understand the Prime Minister has asked you to consider the early release of women prisoners, given the lower risk, this is quoting him, they generally pose. How likely is that?
That's something that we are actively working on now. Again, if we can use that estate better, we absolutely will do.
Just one last question. We understand the Prime Minister's on holiday. I mean, 2 weeks into the job, is that a good time to go off for a break?
Well, the Prime Minister's having a few days away with his family. He will be in constant contact with his office. I mean, I might gently say, Anna, that I've spoken to him virtually every day since I joined the Cabinet, and I suspect that won't change. We've got on, these last couple of weeks, I'm really proud of the work we've been doing on the cost of living, on social care, on homelessness, on defence, and that work is happening at pace and will continue to do so.
Alex Norris, we appreciate you dropping by. Thanks very much indeed for coming in. Let's take a look now at what the weather's doing.
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean All Clear Skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News Weather.
Well, this week will bring some much-needed rain, but probably nothing significant in the drought-stricken south. Scotland will see prolonged early rain confined to the north this morning, with locally heavy and potentially thundery showers following into southern parts. Elsewhere, there'll be sunny spells and a scattering of showers, some torrential and thundery. They'll be concentrated in the west, leaving eastern England mainly dry, and southern parts won't be quite as hot as yesterday. But showers will become more widespread later. East Anglia and the southeast will hardly see any, though.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News Weather.
Do stay tuned. Coming up next, we've got a special report into the murder investigation of a young woman who went missing 4 years ago. That's coming in a moment.
jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party.
I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist. A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan has the right to respond.
You're like, what?
Historic day here today. Congratulations, this is a huge moment. But what happens now?
Now, Sky News has been given unique access to the murder investigation of a vulnerable young woman who went missing 4 years ago and whose body has never been found. Alicia Apostolov-Boyarin's killer had a violent past and would go on to commit further violent crimes behind bars. Well, police admit opportunities were missed and that may have avoided what happened to her. Our chief North of England correspondent, Greg Milam, has the story.
Is there anything you can tell me about Alicia's current whereabouts?
Can I take your full name, please?
Yeah, it's Alicia Apostolov-Boyarin.
This is the story of a vulnerable young woman.
Someone has prevented Alicia from coming home to us.
And a man she trusted. A man who'd been violent in the past and would be again.
How Alicia's life was taken, we don't know.
This is the first time the full story is being told, with tragic missed opportunities. And the question that remains, where is Alicia? It was on a Wednesday that Alicia Apostolov-Boyarin was reported missing. Alicia was 24. She lived here in Ashton-under-Lyne in Manchester. It was a sometimes unsettled lifestyle, moving between the homes of various members of her family. But she was very close to her grandmother, and it was her grandmother who reported her missing. Alicia was vulnerable. She was known to mental health services here, and she had had a dependency on alcohol. But let's go back a month to December and a moment that changed the course of Alicia's life.
Alicia was contacted by a male named David Taylor. He was 61 at the time when he contacted Alicia. She was 24. Alicia met David Taylor through a family friend and associate. So I don't think there was any issues ever in Alicia's mind that this person would obviously cause her any harm. She was picked up by David Taylor from the Greater Manchester area and taken to Durham. It wasn't unusual for Alicia to be away from the family for a couple of days. However, on this occasion, Alicia hadn't been seen by the family for a number of weeks and wasn't responding to messages.
In fact, in the days after David Taylor picked her up in his gold Volkswagen Passat, Alicia had been very visible. They were recorded on CCTV, shopping at this supermarket near his home in County Durham. They were then recorded at a petrol station. That's Alicia in the passenger seat as Taylor fills up.
Can I take your full name, please?
Yeah, it's Alicia Apostolov-Boyarin.
She also phoned her bank.
You have a current available balance of £9 and 2 pence.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, that's no problem.
The voice you hear at the end of the call is David Taylor's. This was on the 16th of January.
We believe that Alicia's life came to an end on the 22nd of January 2022 at the hands of David Taylor. We believe that he travelled back to the Derbyshire area where he had a caravan on a caravan park.
Cameras captured Alicia in Taylor's car close to that caravan park. Half an hour later, GPS showed that's where he was. But no one on that caravan park ever saw Alicia. And during those crucial hours, Taylor had switched off his phone.
And we believe that it's that point in the evening of the 22nd of January 2022 that Alicia's life was ended. How Alicia's life was taken, we don't know.
When Taylor was caught on a police camera the next day, there was no one in the passenger seat. All of this had happened before Alicia was even reported missing. As the days passed for her family, there was an inevitability.
The words in the statement they released are spoken by an actor.
We know in our hearts that someone has prevented Alicia from coming home to us and that she is no longer alive. Alicia's world revolved around her family. She was a shy girl and did not socialise very much. She was only comfortable when she was at home. Not knowing where Alicia is or what has happened to her is torment.
It was then the police were given Taylor's name by the man who'd introduced him to Alicia.
All right, and you've been arrested on suspicion of murder. You don't have to say anything, but it may have been defensive. You don't mention your own questions.
For 5 days he was held and questioned.
Have you killed Alicia? Do you know if Alicia has been killed, Dave?
He never answered and was released without charge. But David Taylor had a violent criminal past. In 1983, a postmaster in Ashton was shot and injured during an armed robbery. Taylor was jailed. He admitted carrying out other armed robberies as well. He just got out of prison 10 years later when he kidnapped a van driver, threatening him with a shotgun before leaving him tied up and gagged. What followed was a manhunt for a man police described as armed and extremely dangerous.
He is an intimidating figure. He will intimidate people to get what he wants out of them rather than what they want. He will use people for his own end, his own gains.
At the time Taylor was under arrest for killing Alicia, he was subject to what's called an IPP, imprisonment for public protection. It's a controversial, indeterminate sentence for people considered dangerous, but who hadn't been given a life sentence. All the while, police were continuing to investigate what happened to Alicia. When they were searching Taylor's home in County Durham, they found ammunition. That was enough to see him recalled to prison under that IPP. With Taylor behind bars, police needed to prove that Alicia wasn't alive. Her body hadn't been found, and it would take them 2 years to build the case against him. In February 2024, David Taylor was charged with Alicia's murder. A few months later, detectives went to see Taylor at Franklin Prison in Durham. He'd said he wanted to talk about Alicia's whereabouts.
We believed at that point he may tell us what had happened, so we deployed 2 officers from our team to go and visit him in prison. There was a short break. Very, very shortly after the officers returned into the room, David Taylor produced what is believed to be a makeshift shank and stabbed one of the officers in the chest.
The officer spent days in hospital. Taylor was charged with attempted murder, but his violence doesn't end there. Taylor is now in Wakefield Prison. It's 3 weeks before he's due to go on trial for stabbing the police officer a year ago, almost 4 years since Alicia died. On CCTV, with 2 convicted murderers, you see him enter the cell of a child killer called Kyle Bevan. Bevan was found the following morning, described as tidily tucked up in bed and dead from 25 stab wounds. Taylor would go on to be found guilty of Bevan's murder and the attempt on the life of the police officer, but not before he had another surprise for police. He'd always denied killing Alicia, but then asked for an unscheduled court hearing.
He was produced via video link from a prison down south. And during the hearing, he was asked by the court whether or not he was guilty or not guilty of Alicia's murder, and he said, yes, I killed her. And that was really, really, one, it was a little bit of relief because we'd had the first time in almost 4 years that we knew we were on the right track and that Alicia had been killed by this person, this David Taylor. But it was also just how nonchalant he was about the whole thing in relation to the fact that he'd taken this person's life.
To this day, Taylor has not said how he killed Alicia or where she is. He has that power as well, doesn't he? I mean, is that something you think he relishes, having the power of that information over her family, over you, over everybody?
There's no doubt in my mind that he has that power, and he's the only person that could tell us what has happened to Alicia and why and what he has done with her. I would ask him to clear his conscience, to come clean about what has actually happened, allow us to recover Alicia for her family and to give her the dignity of the burial that she deserves and to give the family the closure that they deserve.
There is another twist in this story, though. A decade ago, Taylor was investigated over an allegation of sexual violence on the other side of the country. There wasn't enough evidence to charge him, though, and no further action was taken. Do you think there were opportunities in Taylor's past that could have meant he wasn't free to carry out what he did?
Yes, I think there was opportunities at least to look at David Taylor and some of the offending that he had previously committed. Whether or not that would have led to him being in prison and not on the streets is very difficult to say. But there were certainly opportunities that I believe were missed that could have led to that.
And Alicia's story comes with one final tragedy.
So her grandmother she was the one who reported Alicia missing. Clearly she was desperate for some answers in relation to what had happened to Alicia. Unfortunately for us and for the family, our grandmother passed away without getting those answers, and clearly we'll never know exactly what has happened to her granddaughter.
And that mystery remains. In all the years, all that violence, a young woman's fate. David Taylor will spend the rest of his life in prison, the only person to this day who can answer that question. Where is Alicia?
So a really powerful story there from Greg Milam. And if you want more on it, you can scan the QR code that you can see on the side of your screen right now. And we also have more on that story today across Sky News and on our website and our app. Do stay with us. Coming up, we're going to be discussing some of the stories making the headlines in today's papers with the Eye's Global Affairs correspondent, Molly Blackall.
First Minister, how are you?
Good morning. Good morning.
Nice to see you.
How are you feeling? Looking forward to getting into the parliamentary chamber.
Are you any further forward to making a decision?
No, it's an important day today.
All of the claims were in line with my parliamentary duties, so I'm making that clear to you, Conor.
He was a Scot through and through.
He was a very good politician.
Alex Salmond was controversial, he was a disruptor, but above all, he was respected.
Will you resign if you lose this week?
Again, I'm not planning to, of course, lose the vote of no confidence. I'm planning to win that vote of no confidence.
His face said it all.
My intention to stand down as party leader.
This is now a storm with deadly consequences. How are they feeling?
They're a bit scared at the minute.
We've been told to evacuate.
How are you feeling?
Devastated.
Hundreds of homes were wiped out by flooding. I'm Conor Gillis, Sky's Scotland correspondent.
It was probably the darkest time in my life.
Scott is 5 years sober after a cocaine addiction left him close to death.
Scotland has a shameful record. Worse than England, the worst in Europe. So why not just say you failed? Because then you might get more respect from families who've lost loved ones.
This is where one of the UK's most prolific rapists thought he'd got away with murder.
Sky News can reveal that former sex workers had told police he was sexually violent.
My Emma.
Free wherever you get your news. It's over, isn't it?
The Americans say he is Rossi, a fraudster.
This has been one of the most bizarre cases ever heard in a courtroom in this country.
A dangerous murderer.
Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive Andrew Innes after this?
She said she can forgive him, but as long as he's behind bars.
By doing the right thing, it's destroyed your life.
They terrorised me. They intimidated me.
I'm so grateful.
Sky News, the full story first.
I bet right now you often find yourself asking why. Why was a certain decision taken? Why did something happen? Why did they say or do that? I'm Neil Patterson, and it's my job as a journalist to find out why. Just explain why.
It's a difficult one.
Well, I mean, it's massive.
It's a very, very severe situation.
So if you want to make sense of this complicated world, Sky News' new podcast, This Is Why, is your daily fix. One story every day, and we can find out why together. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city where there's a column of Russian armoury. I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
So, time now to take a look at some of the newspaper headlines. I'm joined by Global Affairs correspondent at The Eye, Molly Blackhall. Morning to you, lovely to see you.
Thanks for having me.
And there's an awful lot around, isn't there?
There is.
Today. We're going to kick off, I think, with the front page of the Daily Mirror, which reflects Reform Party's announcement yesterday about what they wanted to do about the small boats issue. They said they were going to bring in the Navy.
They did, and it sounds very simple when you kind of put it like that. Reform said that they would launch the largest military operation in the Channel since the Second World War, and what they would do is basically get the Navy to intercept all the small boats coming over, turn them around and send them back to France. In reality, it might not be quite that simple, and what we're seeing on the front of the Mirror and some of the other papers as well is some of the reporting around the difficulties that plan might face, and there are a number. The first, I think, is the Navy's own capacity. Yes, you could theoretically divert the Navy to this, but that's going to mean that you take capacity away from something else. You know, the Navy doesn't just have unlimited resources, and certainly an expert I was speaking to yesterday was saying that you're going to take it away from the core military function, and that may not actually end up making the UK any safer. Yes, they could monitor small boats, but then they're not looking at, let's say, Russian submarines. But another key part of this is France's opinion. You know, France came out yesterday and said, hang on, you know, we're not having this. It's you know, not a surprise that they don't want to accept a plan which is going to see them take back tens of thousands, potentially, of asylum seekers. They went as far as to say it was a violation of their sovereignty. And I got a text from someone in the military yesterday saying, what do we do when they say no? Do we just declare war on them? I mean, how does that work? So there are a series of obstacles to that plan, and that's what's special
Reform
today.
would argue that it's actually in France's interest because they have what they described as shanty towns on the coast of people waiting to go over, and so it's not in their interest to have those continue, and this would help resolve that situation, is what they...
Yeah, I mean, it's not in anyone's interest to have people, you know, living in these kind of conditions or making these perilous journeys, not least the migrants themselves. But crossings are down, as France pointed out, on last year. So far this year, they're down about 40% from where they were in 2025. And, you know, somebody I was speaking to yesterday was saying, if France don't want this to happen and we try and do it anyway, there's a risk that they just say, well, this whole thing is off and we're not going to do the beach patrols or the intelligence sharing, which has been really crucial to getting those numbers down so far. You know, Lord West yesterday, who's their former head of the Navy, said this idea, while it sounds, you know, in principle very simple, is a bit pie in the sky.
Yeah, but you can see what Reform are doing here. They feel that they're very strong on the issue of immigration, and this is an issue that a lot of people are very upset about, the idea of these people crossing the Channel, putting their lives at risk, which there are concerns around, obviously, from the public, but also that sense that the people, when they arrive, are put up in hotels, or certainly have been, and they feel sometimes jump the queue.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody is saying that this is a perfect situation. You know, I don't think anybody wants this situation to continue. In fact, you know, in the time I've covered this, everybody from sort of aid workers on the left to politicians on the right all agree that the current system is not working. The question is more, how do we solve that? And certainly what defence experts have been saying in the last couple of days is, sadly, while, you know, many people would agree with the principle behind trying to stop this, this just isn't it.
OK, let's move on to the front of The Guardian. They're really reflecting what we're talking about a lot today, and this is the decision on the early release scheme. A certain number of prisoners due to have their sentences reduced and let out early. That was due to kick in from September. Andy Burnham came into office, pressed the pause button because of some of the public upset about this, and has now made some exemptions.
Exactly right. So this is all in the context of an overcrowded prison system. That's why this is happening. And it's important to say, I think, that it isn't unusual for people to spend a portion of their sentences within the community. That's very normal, and that people serve used to be about half, and then they spend the rest of it sort of being monitored within their community by the probation service, etc. But what happened was the prison service was sort of reaching capacity, and the estate was getting full, and the government said, OK, we need to do something about this. So they launched this early release scheme. So as you say, Andy Burnham came in, and it was really one of the first things that he mentioned was wanting to pause this and have a look at it. That process now seems to have been completed, and the outcome is that some people are going to be blocked from that scheme who might have been otherwise moving ahead with it, but others are still going to be released. And that includes one very high-profile case, which is two of the killers of PC Andrew Harper, the policeman who was killed in 2019 while he was responding to a crime. And his widow, Lizzie, has come out very strongly today, saying that she feels this is a betrayal, she can't forgive it. And it's sort of a slap in the face, really, to victims. And I think the PM is very cognizant of that. You can tell from the wording of his statements around this. He says, I want to be honest with you, I wanted to go further than this. So I think he is stuck really between a rock and a hard place, and clearly there's discomfort from him and sympathy, I think, with the victims, but perhaps a feeling that, you know, this is necessary to stop the whole system collapsing.
Well, yeah, and if you have prisons reaching full capacity, then it really affects the whole justice system, doesn't it? You have police feeling that they can't arrest people because they've got nowhere to put them. So there is a sort of, you know, huge issue here that you understand. I mean, there have been other solutions floated, the idea of using women's prisons, of releasing some women earlier who are considered to be less of a risk in society, but there's no perfect solution here at all.
There isn't, and you know, even the bigger picture solutions like build more prisons take a very, very long time. And I think that this is something that Andy Burnham is going to run up against, I think, time and time again. You know, he's got big visions for reforming the UK's infrastructure, and no matter how well-intentioned that might be, these things are very difficult to do in practice. Really, like we're talking about with small boats, is easy to say and a lot harder to do, and a lot of these systems are quite archaic and will take a very long time to reform. And so clearly this is a short-term solution, but as, you know, PC Andrew Harper's wife would say, an imperfect one.
Exactly, and we're getting plenty of reaction, actually, to that story on the programme today. Lots of different groups and individuals who are affected by it we're going to be chatting to as the day goes on. But let's just turn to the Eye now, and not a big surprise, this headline, but it's still pretty shocking when you see it in those numbers. The driest July in 190 years.
Yeah, exactly, and with an image that I think a lot of us, at least in England and Wales, would recognise, these scorched parks, grasses all over the place at the moment. So this story says that England and Wales have recorded their driest July since records began in 1836. As you say, people who are experiencing this in England and Wales won't be surprised, but there are some really shocking details to this. In South Wales, firefighters fighting a wildfire the size of 210 football pitches, which is absolutely enormous, and we're obviously seeing those across Europe as well. Many people have died, whole areas have been devastated, and sadly, you know, the climate crisis, scientists are indicating this will, you know, extreme weather events at least will become more common as a result of that. The only silver lining in this story, which I would point you towards in an effort to add a bit of good news, is that solar power is experiencing sort of record heights, because at the very least the sun is good for that.
Well, yes, well, yeah, we go from that brief positive moment to something really quite depressing inside The Guardian. And this is a survey that suggests there's been a rise in racist abuse within the NHS.
Yeah, it does. And this is specifically looking at patients racially abusing, in this case, radiographers. But there is a statistic in here as well around the nursing union in October that said that the number of racist incidents experienced by staff had risen by 55% over 3 years. And someone interviewed for this piece in The Guardian saying that for them, these instances are personally becoming more common as well. So both kind of hard evidence and some anecdotal evidence that these things are on the rise. And I think, you know, this is part of a broader picture, isn't it? It's almost the filtering down of some of the political rhetoric that we've seen in the UK. You know, we have seen a normalisation of perhaps quite far-right views. We've seen rioting on the streets around mass migration. And I think some of it is perhaps normalising some quite extreme views and shifting the Overton window, perhaps, in what people think is acceptable.
Well, yeah, and another rather kind of depressive feature of this story is that some of the workers have said they've just come to accept that that's part of the job now, that they are going to be treated differently, and say that it's not just the sort of blatant racism that they're sometimes coming up against, it's the not being treated as senior as you are, assuming that someone more junior than you is more senior to you because of their race. I mean, really kind of quite shocking detail in that survey.
And there's a quote in here from someone senior in the NHS who points out something really stark, I think, which is that this is creating, they say, a fear, a trauma and anxiety among the workforce who are trying to deliver for people at the most kind of vulnerable and tender moments in their lives. And the contrast between that, I think, is really sad.
We've only got about a minute and a half, but should we talk Barbie? But
yes,
this is,
let's talk Barbie.
Inside the Times, we could all do with some cheering up, couldn't we? And although this is talking about the sequel, but it's saying that it could be in jeopardy, so it's not necessarily going to cheer us up.
I know, we found even more bad news in the good news, somehow.
Even in Barbie.
Yes, so this is a pay spat. So effectively, it seems like the two stars of the hit Barbie franchise are basically saying we won't come back unless you pay us more. Apparently, Ryan Gosling is asking to be paid 20 million dollars for a sequel, which I'm sure is, you know, just your daily fee here on Sky. But for most people, I think it would be pretty eye-watering. But it did gross 1.4 billion when it came out in cinemas, so maybe they're justified.
Well, yeah, and I wonder if you have got more, you know, pulling power when it's a sequel and you've obviously been such a success first time round.
Yeah.
You know, they really want the same stars, don't they?
Well, the show can't go on without them. Well, apparently the writer, Greta Gerwig, is actually refusing to give producers the script and the plan for her show until the stars agree. So they really do have people in the palm of their hand at the moment. Their plastic hands.
Their plastic hands, obviously, which are quite difficult to manoeuvre. Anyway, yeah, well, I'm hoping that does happen because I did really enjoy the first.
It was good fun.
First one.
It was good fun.
Molly, lovely to see you. I know you're going to come back in the next hour as well. Thank you, though, for the moment. And don't go anywhere because we've got all the top stories coming your way in just a moment.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist? I'm going to take you behind the scenes here for Election Night Live. They have gone up and up. Being a Sky News journalist. Ed Conway. Sky News, is anyone going to talk to us? Mortgage rates did go up very sharply during your time in office. Here it is. First off, just the scale of what we're looking at. Our data shows it's been happening. Question is, why it hasn't been stopped.
Hello and a very good morning. It's 8 o'clock. This is Mornings with me, Anna Jones. Here's how things are looking. Andy Burnham waters down prison overcrowding plans with serious sexual offenders no longer eligible for early release, but killers can still be freed. Donald Trump says Iran has one last chance to make a peace deal, accusing the regime of being duplicitous. Major retailers on London high streets to begin using police technology to help catch shoplifters. Also ahead, we're going to be discussing the stories making the headlines in today's papers with the Eye's Global Affairs correspondent, Molly Blackhall. Plus, Sky News is given rare access to the murder investigation of a young woman who went missing 4 years ago and whose body has never been found. Hello, a very good morning. Thanks for being with us this morning. Our top story here today, prisoners convicted of rape, serious child sexual offences and grooming will no longer be eligible for early release as part of watered-down plans to tackle overcrowding. Adult male prisons are at 98% capacity. Well, the initial proposal from Keir Starmer would have allowed some of the most serious offenders to be freed. However, Andy Burnham says these changes are in response to public anger. In a statement, he said, "Keeping the public safe is my top priority. That's why I asked for an urgent review of the prisoner release scheme. I fully understand the anger, anxiety and distress that's been caused. I want to be honest, I wanted to go even further as I know there will still be concerns about whether other offenders having their sentence shortened. But it's not possible without the prison system reaching capacity and collapsing, which will put public safety at much greater risk." Well, let's bring in Molly Malone, who's been covering this story very closely. Hi there, Molly. So we've got a real sense of regret from the Prime Minister there that he couldn't cover more people with these exemptions, but they have made a choice. What do you make of what they're saying?
What he's done, as you say, is basically put a pause on the policy. He conducted this review lasting, well, just a number of days, really, because this all sort of came about just days into office. But it is a law, a policy that was implemented and got royal assent, actually, at the beginning of the year under Keir Starmer. And it came off the back of an independent review of sentencing policy. Why? Because, as we know, we've got huge overcrowding problems in prisons, particularly in the male prison estate, operating at about 98% capacity. So what Andy Burnham did is he's put this exclusions in place for certain offences, certain sentence types, including rape, including grooming offences and serious child sexual offences. Now, what was supposed to happen in September the 2nd, you get this phased release in 10 tranches of about 6,000 people. We've now had it from the government that actually that's going to look more like 5,000. So the exclusions mean that you're releasing around 1,000 fewer people, which sounds like a lot, but at the moment the situation in prisons is very fluid and we know that actually those places can build up quite quickly. And what you're getting already, I think, is this dividing line between different victim groups, some of them sort of saying, why you're making those exclusions but not excluding my perpetrator, because you can only imagine what it's like to get that victim letter through from probation saying that they're going to be released at an earlier point when they'd heard from the judge that actually they were going to serve, say, 2/3 of their sentence and now being released at halfway through their sentence for more dangerous criminals, and actually others at a third of their sentence rather than the 40%, which is where they would have been released otherwise. Now, at the top of that list is the family of PC Andrew Harper, which in some respects this review came about off the back of, because it was his family that were very upset about the prospect of two of his killers being released early. Now, people will remember he was a police officer that was killed in the line of duty after being dragged for a mile behind a car driven by 3 men along a country road while responding to a burglary in 2019 in Berkshire. Now, we understand that 2 of his killers could have qualified for early release. 1 of them wouldn't qualify because they'd have to see the parole board before being released. But we've had a statement from his wife, PC Harper, who said, "The killers of Andrew have shown no remorse. They robbed us of our future. They are vile criminals and they should remain in jail. To release them early from their already pitiful sentence is an affront to justice. The government and the justice system have not just let me down, they have added insult to injury. They are meant to be on our side. This is an utter betrayal, and it's one I will not be able to forgive or forget." So that's sort of what I mean in terms of the dividing line between victims. Some of them might feel a little bit relieved that their perpetrator's been excluded from this early release. Others really, really upset about the prospect of their killers in this case being released.
Yeah, and as you were referencing earlier, we spoke to the Justice Secretary, Alex Norris, a little bit earlier on, didn't we? Let's just listen to what he had to say.
So over the 10 tranches, over 10 months, it will be 5,000 people. You know, we're in the process of the recalculation, so I wouldn't be drawn on that number now.
So it was going to be 6,000.
It was originally meant to be
6,000.
Yes, it's now 5,000. And again, for context, 4,500 people leave prison on an ordinary month. So that's the kind of scale. That's why I believe probation will be able to do their important work in terms of meeting all that workload, and you know that's what's ahead of us.
So a little bit of clarity there on the numbers from Alex Norris, but no real clarity on how they came to that decision that some groups of prisoners would be exempted and others not. And I guess we're still going to get those questions from the victims about that, aren't we?
Yeah, I think those questions will continue to come. I think the reality is that some of this is about political pressure. Some of this is about pragmatism. 1,000 fewer people sounds like a lot, but prisons are really, really building up, as you say, 98% capacity in the men's estate. And there are about, as of right now, 1,800 spaces left. Again, it sounds like a lot, doesn't it? But it's certainly not the 100 spaces that we had 2 summers ago. But prison spaces are fluid. It's a really fluid situation. You have one sort of major event like the riots or something like that, and quite quickly you're in the situation where we were 2 summers ago, where you were using police custody suites as sort of alternative to prison cells. So that's the perspective of the government. But clearly, victims are going to be really upset about this.
Absolutely. And some victims a bit more relieved. I know we're going to be talking to a grooming gang survivor, aren't we? I know you're going to join me for that a little bit later on this hour to get their reaction to the fact that that category of prisoner is part of the exemption. So we'll get more reaction from her, but also from lots of other interested parties throughout the morning. And Molly, for the moment, thank you. See you shortly. Now, Donald Trump has issued what he's calling a last chance for Iran to sign a peace deal. He's also accused the Iranian regime of being duplicitous after Tehran dismissed claims that they were involved in talks at all. Well, speaking in the Oval Office, Mr. Trump warned that this is the last chance for Iran to make a deal or risk escalation.
The talks are going along. We were going to hit them very hard yesterday, very, very hard, harder than any attack. I think I can say, General, from a point of knowledge, any attack since World War II, that's pretty big. This is the last chance. This is not something that, if it doesn't happen, this is the last chance for them to sign a good document.
Well, let's bring in our security and defence analyst, Michael Clark, who's here with me now. Morning to you, Michael.
Hello, yeah.
They don't seem to be able to agree, the US and Iran, on whether or not they're even having talks. So that doesn't bode well for if talks do happen, whether or not they'll find an agreement, I guess.
No, not for anything soon. In a way, they're both right. When Donald Trump says we have talks going on, well, there are communications going on all the time. And so at the moment, Qatar, Oman, are quite active. So is Pakistan. At other times, Egypt and Turkey have been very active. So there's lots of countries behind the scenes who are keeping channels open, and American low-level officials are speaking to Iranian low-level officials, and the Iranians are speaking to the Omanis. So he's right when he says, in a way, talks are going on, but at a very low level. The Iranians are also right when they say no talks are taking place because none of the big hitters are involved. I mean, when you see Arachi, the foreign minister, or Pezeshkian, the president, when you see them go to some sort of meeting and J.D. Vance turns up because Trump sends him, or Marco Rubio and Arachi, the 2 foreign ministers, when they get together, that's the sort of talks the Iranians are speaking about. So there's this constant sort of process of communication, but we're not near anything that looks like going back to the Memorandum of Understanding, where they thought they had the outline of an agreement to keep on talking. We're still a bit of a way away from that.
But do you think we're near to those high-level talks?
Well, probably nearer to it than people think we are, because Trump can just order Rubio to go and talk to Arachi. And I think the Iranians, I don't think they will resist talks if the Americans look as if they're sincere about it. But the Iranians have got the whip hand here. They know that they have the agenda, because the MOU that we're talking about from a month ago was very pro-Iranian. I mean, why the Americans signed up to it, we will discover in the fullness of time. But it gave the Iranians more or less everything they wanted, and quite a lot of sweeteners as well. It gave the Americans virtually nothing. And, of course, the Iranians will go back to that if Trump comes to it. But Trump is in this position now. He's got to go big or go home. Last week, CENTCOM, Central Command, Brad Cooper, Admiral Brad Cooper, the commander of CENTCOM, he gave Trump options to really extend the war. And that's what Trump was talking about. We're locked and ready to go, he said. And Sky's Data and Forensics, last week, we tracked, they, with me talking to them, they tracked an 80% increase in American military traffic from America bouncing through Britain and Germany and bouncing onto the Middle East.
They really were ready.
They really were ready. This spike in military traffic was terrific. It was terrifically interesting. And they were ready to go. And Brad Cooper briefed Trump last week, according to American sources, on these are the options for going big. We can really, if you want us to, we can go big. So he's now faced with the idea, go big or go home. Either make all-out war on Iran, with what that will imply, and the Iranians will then go hard on attacking all of the Gulf states, and Trump won't do that. I'm sure he won't. So he's faced with go big or go home. He's looking for ways to go home, but he's got to go back to negotiating the terms of the MOU, which are very unfavourable to him.
And the real sense is he does, as you say, want an off-ramp. He doesn't want to keep the fighting going, especially with elections looming and the oil price going up every time there's a strike and going down when he says there's a pause.
Yeah, whenever it gets to $100, he gets scared. I mean, when the oil price, I think today it's something like 87,
85 or 86.
85, 86, something like that. Yeah. Obviously, it changes every day. But when it goes towards 95, 98, 99, then he gets frightened and starts to think a bit differently. And we're 13 weeks away now from the November midterm elections, and he's burning up the weeks. He's burning time between now and then.
Have you got a theory about how this could all wrap up?
I think it will wrap up with an agreement on the MOU, which, with a couple of tweaks, might be acceptable to Tehran, and Trump will have to take it away and pretend that it's a great victory. It won't be, but that's what he'll have to pretend. We said from the very beginning of this war, at some point he has to declare victory and go home, declare victory and leave. And that's still the situation. From the 7th of April, when they had the original ceasefire, I mean, he lost the war that day because military action wasn't going to achieve anything else politically. That's the conclusion they came to. Since then, we've been discussing the terms upon which America declares victory and leaves. It's not much of a victory. Everything is worse because of this war. But he will have to pretend that it's a great victory. Some of his supporters will believe that because they've given him papal infallibility, but the rest of the world won't.
Yeah, and this is a war that was supposed to be 4 or 5 weeks back in February, wasn't
it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but into 6 months. The 6th month has begun.
Is that right? Yeah.
In August.
Michael, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Now, let's stay with Donald Trump, because he was also asked about the Prime Minister, Andy Burnham. President Trump said he believes that the pair will have a very good relationship, but he also said the UK needed to do more to tackle immigration and tap into North Sea oil.
When you look at the UK, they have one of the best energy fields in the world, North Sea oil. Now, I think your new Prime Minister is going to actually open up from what I hear, I spoke to him, and he sounded terrific on this subject. But you open it up, you'll be a wealthy country. You keep it closed, you're going to be a bankrupt country, which is what you are now. Essentially, you're a bankrupt country. Look, I think we're going to have a very good relationship. We'll see. I'm not going to tell him how to run his country. But I can tell you, immigration is an incredible problem for Europe.
So let's bring in Alex, who was watching that. And Alex, really interesting to get Donald Trump's take on the new Prime Minister, because everyone watches that relationship with such interest, don't they? And some warm words, but also a few policy warnings once again.
Well, so far there seem to be, positive notes, although it was quite funny that he said Andy Burnham initially was the mayor of some town and he referred to him as the gentleman, so maybe he forgot his name on a couple of occasions. But yeah, they seem to, especially on the North Sea, Donald Trump seems to be liking some of the sounds that are coming out of Andy Burnham, who's saying that he might be more pragmatic when it comes to allowing more drilling there. And the North Sea drilling and immigration are two issues that he's raised with Andy Burnham and also with Keir Starmer, JD Vance as well, that whole White House administration really going hard on immigration. But as ever, what may play well internationally may be difficult for Andy Burnham domestically, because there's already signs that if he does shift this position on more drilling in the North Sea, that could annoy some of his backbenchers, some of whom I've been speaking to, who are worried that this is going to turn voters back to the Greens just when they think that Andy Burnham may be tempting them back to Labour.
Yeah, that's really interesting how they handle all of that. And they're getting pressure from other political parties to do more drilling as well. So it's really interesting what decision will be made on that. But this relationship with Donald Trump, I mean, it is an important one, isn't it? And how do you think Andy Burnham will play it?
I think it'll be interesting to see. I mean, one of the surprises, I guess you could say a surprise of the Keir Starmer premiership was the level of friendship that they managed to strike up. But people were always saying these two are very, very different men, have very different politics. Donald Trump says Keir Starmer was extremely liberal, but they managed to find a good sense of agreement on a lot of things, although not latterly the Iran war, of course. So it'll be interesting to see how Andy Burnham plays it. I would say his instincts are to not be like-minded someone like Trump, but he's obviously going to have to take this relationship seriously. It's one of the most important that we have, and he will be no stranger to that fact.
Interesting stuff, Alex. One to watch very closely. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Now then, we're going to return to our top story about those changes to the prisoner early release scheme. Molly is back. And Molly, you're back because, as I was mentioning earlier, we are going to be able to talk to a grooming gang survivor in a moment. Remind us what the changes are that will affect cases like this.
Yeah, so the changes are that there are now exclusions in place for what's become known as an early release policy. So the policy has been delayed from September to October and will now exclude certain offenders. So that's rapists, it's groomers and it's offenders that have committed serious child sexual offences. In terms of the numbers, they expect that will be about 1,000 people, so releasing around 1,000 fewer people. It will come, I think, as light relief to some people, perhaps the lady we're about to speak to, but I think what we're already seeing is dividing lines being created between victims groups, some of whom today will still be questioning why is it the case that these exclusions can be put in place for some perpetrators but not others. The answer, I think the government would say, is overcrowding. So
let's talk to Sarah now. We saw her just a moment ago as I was mentioning that we would speak to her. Sarah, very good morning to you. You, as we were describing just then, are the survivor of a grooming gang. As I understand it, there were a number of men found guilty of offences against you. You were concerned that some might be released early. There have now been exemptions announced that presumably mean that won't happen. So what's your reaction?
Yeah, it feels like a victory and also a bittersweet moment, really. We've campaigned for the last month or so and the news last night was such a relief. It felt like a weight had been lifted off our shoulders.
Well, yes, and give us a sense of what it had felt like when you found that 2 of those found guilty of offences against you might be released early. How did you feel when you heard that that was a possibility?
My mental health took a total dive. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I kind of isolated myself. My world totally felt like it had just fallen apart. But now I feel like I can start picking that back up again, now that we've won this fight.
Sarah, hello, it's Molly here, correspondent covering the story today. What I wanted to ask is the prospect of that release happening, because what we now know is that about 1,000 people are now not going to be released at the earlier point that they potentially would have before. But from your perspective, talk us through what it would have felt like to, you know, have these people back out in the community, have your perpetrators back out in the community, and knowing, of course, that they will be monitored by probation, that there will be exclusion zones in place. But what was that prospect going to feel like of them potentially just a few miles away from you?
Myself and many other survivors up and down the country was thinking, do we need to move towns? Do we need to rearrange our whole lives? You know, these men, these monsters, were sentenced for some of the most heinous crimes in our country, and they was about to be released earlier under the new release scheme, and survivors joining together, we've stopped that. But if they'd have not stopped and exempt these paedophiles and rapists from this early release scheme, then there'd have been so much more uproar and uncertainty in the communities.
Can you talk to us a little bit about confidence in the justice system? Because so much of what people will be feeling today, so much of what people will be feeling, have been feeling for the last couple of years, is about confidence in the justice system, feeling like you're getting some kind of justice for what you've been through. How have you felt about the entire process, and how do you feel, I guess, on behalf of yourself now, but also for other victims who this morning will be waking up and seeing that there are some exclusions in place, but, you know, others will feel potentially still pretty let down by what they're seeing?
I'm so tired from the whole process, you know. I started my investigations 11 years ago, and some survivors will take a lot longer. This fight isn't just for us survivors that's been campaigning. This is for every single survivor up and down our country, and future survivors as well. If this new law would have come into place, then that would have stopped survivors from coming forward in the future, and that's not what we needed.
And Sarah, the government is saying that it's inherited a system that was on the brink of collapse, and that prisons were at risk of overcrowding. Do you have some understanding of why they've brought in this early release scheme?
I understand that the prisons are more or less at the full capacity, but that doesn't mean that we should release dangerous offenders. In fact, what we should be focusing on is releasing people who've committed petty crimes rather than the people who've committed some of the most heinous crimes in our country. I know for a fact that myself and many other victims and survivors of all different crimes would feel safer with thieves on the street than dangerous predators.
Well, Sarah, we really appreciate you talking to us this morning. Thank you so much for spending the time and giving us your reaction to the government announcement this morning. We do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Sarah's such a brave person speaking out about her experience at all, but also really interesting giving her reaction there, talking about how her mental health really suffered when she heard that 2 of the perpetrators in the crimes against her might be released early. Clearly, that's not going to happen now because that's part of the exemptions that have been announced, but a real sense of what it would have meant to her had they been out on the streets.
Yeah, I think sometimes we forget, don't we, that, you know, victims might go to court, they might see their perpetrator sentenced to a pretty hefty sentence, and now seeing the prospect of them released at the kind of 3rd waypoint, sometimes the halfway point, it's not actually a massive difference compared to what they would have been released to before, but it's that prospect of receiving that letter from, say, probation, like a total bolt from the blue. You know, many of the victims that I've spoken to over the years talk about how it's light relief, you know, given what they've been through. Sometimes it's justice, just seeing them go to prison. Sometimes that doesn't happen in the first place. They sometimes see the court process as the sort of final hurdle, the sentence as the final hurdle, and then receiving that letter when they've only just perhaps days before finally switched off and moved on, started to the process of moving on with their lives, to then receive that letter, it's really quite hard to imagine that, you know, they're just told by the form of a letter that they're coming out. So I think to receive that news, it is really quite something. So yeah, for some of them, like Sarah, some small, perhaps light relief, but as I was sort of saying before, this is about confidence in the justice system, and victims all need to feel that when people are sentenced, that they are punished properly, and that really makes a difference to their lives.
Yeah, and Molly, this is such a big issue. We're going to be talking about it again in the next hour, so we'll see you then. For the moment, thanks very much indeed. In the meantime, let's bring you some of the other stories around this morning. And BP's second quarter profit has more than doubled from the same time a year ago, beating analysts' expectations. The oil giant reported an underlying replacement cost profit of $5.73 billion. Oil majors have seen higher returns as the Middle East conflict contributes to elevated oil and gas prices. Now, NHS staff say they've experienced a noticeable rise in racism from patients over the last 18 months. A new poll conducted by the Society of Radiographers found staff reported being called derogatory names and patients refusing to be treated by non-white staff. They say that's led to some workers to accept racism as part of the job. A normalisation of racism in society is being blamed for the rise.
It should be surprising, but we are hearing it day in and day out. And I think it's because of what we're being fed in the media, what certain politicians are saying very publicly. I think there's been a normalisation of racism in society and in civility. People are being empowered to be racist, and they're not being held to account, they're not being dealt with. And unfortunately, it has created a culture, not just in workplaces, but in society.
Footage has emerged at the moment that a drone crashed into a busy beach resort in southern Russia yesterday, killing 7 people. And I should say the video shows the moment up to the strike as well as the aftermath. So this footage shows the drone falling to the ground, followed by a large explosion. 3 of those killed were reported to be children, and 40 others were injured in the attack. The death toll from twin earthquakes that hit Venezuela in June has risen to 6,125, according to new figures from the country's government. Nearly 61,000 people were hospitalised. Efforts to rebuild and clear the damage are ongoing, but less than a quarter of all debris has been removed. Now, here, major retailers on London's high streets are going to begin using police technology to help catch shoplifters. Well, Graham is here to tell us a little bit more about it. So, Graham, tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, essentially, this police technology allows shops to submit CCTV footage, witness statements and other video evidence directly to officers. So before something like CCTV, it could take officers up to 28 days to actually get hold of. Now that could be a matter of minutes. It's being trialled in London across 6 boroughs, but today it's being expanded into another 7 because it is seemingly, according to the map, proving pretty successful. In cases of shoplifting, normally a charge or a caution is brought in around 7% of cases, so less than 1 in 10, yeah. Really low. But in the trial area, that rose to nearly 1 in 3 cases, 30%. It's being rolled out to shops including Tesco, Boots, Greggs. These are retailers whose bosses have spoken out about the impact of the surge in retail crime. Police say it helped charge a teenager who went on a shoplifting spree worth more than £100,000. It's also been used to ban one prolific shoplifter from every Holland and Barrett, Greggs and BP, not just in London, but in England and Wales, after stealing £4,000 worth of goods. These are obviously individual cases, but the scale of the problem is massive, more than 500,000 incidents every single year. That's been for the last 2 years. There was a record high in 2024, a real post-pandemic surge. Retailers have been crying out, asking for help, and this may be the police starting to find an answer, but it's still really early days.
Yeah, and obviously it's an absolute nightmare for shop owners, isn't it, and staff. But you wonder whether, you know, shoplifters themselves, if they see that so few people do get charged, that they feel like it's worth it. The deterrence factor of a higher conviction rate would obviously be an issue as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that less than 1 in 10 stat is, as you picked up on, quite amazingly low. I mean, 30% of people is a little bit higher, But also you have to remember it's one of those offences that actually it doesn't, you know, a lot of the time it won't go recorded. So there's also a lot of unreported crime there that can't be addressed, isn't being addressed. Any kind of deterrent I think the police are going to find is going to be incredibly welcome to retailers, because they've been really, really asking for some kind of intervention on this.
Yeah, interesting to see where it goes, how expanded it gets. Graham, thanks very much indeed. Stay with us, we've got lots coming up. We're going to be speaking actually to a children's charity in a moment about a decline in the number of people in England being adopted.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party.
I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist. A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan had the right to respond. You're like, what?
Historic day here today. Congratulations, this is a huge moment. But what happens now?
Now, the number of families approved to adopt in the UK has been on decline, according to a children's charity, with this being 100 years since adoption in the UK came into law. So the charity Coram found more than 3,000 children with a placement order are now waiting to be adopted in England. Over half of these young people have waited 18 months or more for a family since entering care. Yet the number of adoptive families is decreasing, with only 1,350 approved families currently available. So joining us now is Coram's Chief Executive, Dame Carol Homden. I'm very pleased that you could come in and talk to us about this. So that research, as we were showing, shows this quite steep decline in the number of families being approved for adoption. Talk us through why that is.
Well, 10 years ago, we were approving more than 3 times as many adopters. And many people in the country approve adoption, think it's a great solution for children, and are willing to come forwards. But of course, what we have seen is a cost of living crisis, with an increase in housing costs in particular, and much greater access to infertility treatment. And also, many people are now caring for elderly relatives as well. So the combination of these things, plus perhaps concerns over whether they can meet the needs of the children waiting have all come together to mean that we now have a crisis for our youngest and most vulnerable children.
So it's mostly about people's individual circumstances. It's not about the system itself. That hasn't got more onerous or anything in terms of deciding whether someone's suitable.
No, the system has remained the same, really, over the last 10 years. Many people are concerned that it's overlong. And, of course, it is an inquiry. It is a very carefully considered system to make sure that adoption is right for people who come forwards. It's not right for everyone. Adoption is for the few and not the many. And it's a careful process to make sure that people understand what the needs of the children are likely to be, and that they have the support around them that they may need when they become parents.
Well, yes, and it can be quite tough, can't it, for adoptive parents?
Yes, it can. I mean, the children who are waiting for adoption are very young, yes, mostly under 4, but they have had the toughest start in life, and that will leave a legacy. But many adopters, the vast majority of adopters, in fact, thrive through that process and go on to talk about the joy that the child has brought. But let's be clear, there are children waiting who do have complex needs as well. And we in agencies and, of course, in the NHS and elsewhere, it's our job to make sure that people go into adoption with their eyes open.
And you're asking the government for more support. What do you want to see change?
Well, we would like to see there being more support to adopters, more certainty of that support. And that doesn't just mean adoption agencies, of course. That means schools and the National Health Service, so that adopted children are prioritised throughout all of our systems of support. We'd also like to see more encouragement and support to people to come forwards, not only for adoption, but for fostering as well, because you can, of course, foster and then go on to adopt potentially, depending on the circumstances of the child.
And you said that most of the children are 4 and below. Why is that? Is that because children who are older are less likely to be taken up by families? Why is the age tends to be below 4?
Well, there are a very large number, around 100,000 children in the care system. The majority of those will be there temporarily. And for others, fostering is the right solution, or kinship care is the right solution. And if you're an older child when you come into care, you will have networks of support around you. You'll have memories and connections that need to be nurtured. For the youngest children, these are circumstances where it's been identified that the risks and harm that child faces are too high and that the child needs a permanent loving home. Adoption is the only way in which that is going to be secured and achieved.
Well, yeah, and give us more of a sense of what difference it can make to a child to move from care into a more permanent family.
Well, let us all think about what really matters to us, that we have people who walk by our side for life, that love us unconditionally for life, no matter what life brings. That's the difference that adoption makes.
So what would your message be to anybody who is thinking about becoming an adoptive parent but aren't sure? What would your message be?
Talk to others who have adopted, those you know. Many of us know people who are adopted or who are adopters, and come forwards, explore it. We're there to help you, to guide you through the process, to find out if it's right for you. You can visit firstforadoption.org.uk and find out information about the children waiting and the process. You can, of course, come to quorum.org.uk or to any local agency. We are all there to support you in making this inquiry. Please pick up the phone and see whether it's right for you today.
Well, Dame Carol Hobbiton, we appreciate you coming in and chatting about this. Really interesting to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Now, Sky News has been given unique access to the murder investigation of a vulnerable young woman who went missing 4 years ago and whose body has never been found. Alicia Apostolov, Boyarin's killer, had a violent past and would go on to commit further violent crimes behind bars. Well, police admit that opportunities were missed that may have avoided what happened to her. Our chief North of England correspondent, Greg Milam, has the story.
Is there anything you can tell me about Alicia's current whereabouts?
Can I take your full name, please?
Yeah, it's Alicia Apostolov Boyarin.
This is the story of a vulnerable young woman.
Someone has prevented Alicia from coming home to us.
And a man she trusted. A man who'd been violent in the past and would be again.
How Alicia
His life was taken. We don't know.
This is the first time the full story is being told. And it's a story that's taken us from Manchester to County Durham to Derbyshire in search of the truth about what happened to Alicia. Along the way, we find tragic missed opportunities that might have prevented what happened to Alicia.
I would ask him to clear his conscience.
And we find she wasn't the only victim. So what did happen to Alicia? Why was no one able to prevent it? And what did that man go on to do, even when he was in prison? You can watch our full report on the Sky News app and YouTube channel, because one big question remains. Where is Alicia?
So it's a really powerful story being told by Greg Milam. If you want to see the full report, more on that story, you can scan the QR code that you can see on your screen right now. And we'll also have more on it today across Sky News, on our website and also on our app. Let's take a look at the weather.
You're looking happy.
Well, the forecast looks good.
So you've sorted the travel insurance then?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News weather.
Well, this week will bring much-needed rain, but probably nothing significant in the drought-stricken south. Scotland will see prolonged early rain becoming confined to the north this morning, with locally heavy and potentially thundery showers following into southern parts. Elsewhere, there'll be sunny spells and a scattering of showers, some torrential and thundery. They'll be concentrated in the west, leaving eastern England mainly dry. Southern parts won't be as hot as yesterday, and showers will become more widespread later.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News weather.
Stay with us. We're going to be looking at the papers once again in just a moment. With me will be EYE's Global Affairs correspondent, Molly Blackall. That's coming up next.
First Minister, how are you?
Good morning. Good morning.
Nice to see you.
How are you feeling? Looking forward to getting into the parliamentary chamber.
Are you any further forward to making a decision?
No, it's an important day today.
All of the claims were in line with my parliamentary duties, so I'm making that clear to you, Conor.
He was a Scot through and through.
He was a very good politician.
Alex Salmond was controversial, he was a disruptor, but above all, he was respected.
Will you resign if you lose this week?
Again, I'm not planning to, of course, lose the vote of no confidence. I'm planning to win that vote of no confidence.
His face said it all.
My intention to stand down as party leader.
This is now a storm with deadly consequences. How are they feeling?
They're a bit scared at the minute.
We've been told to evacuate.
How are you feeling?
Devastated.
Hundreds of homes were wiped out by flooding. I'm Conor Gillis, Sky's Scotland correspondent.
It was probably the darkest time in my life.
Scott is 5 years sober after a cocaine addiction left him close to death.
Scotland has a shameful record, worse than England, the worst in Europe.
So why not just say you failed? Because then you might get more respect from families who've lost loved ones.
This is where one of the UK's most prolific rapists thought he'd got away with murder.
Sky News can reveal that former sex workers had told police he was sexually violent.
My Emma.
Free wherever you get your news.
It's over, isn't it?
The Americans say he is Rossi, a fraudster.
This has been one of the most bizarre cases ever heard in a courtroom in this country.
A dangerous murderer.
Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive Andrew Innes after this?
She said she can forgive him, but as long as he's behind bars.
By doing the right thing, it's destroyed your life.
They terrorised me, they intimidated me.
I'm so grateful.
Sky News, the full story first.
I bet right now you often find yourself asking why. Why was a certain decision taken? Why did something happen? Why did they say or do that? I'm Neil Patterson, and it's my job as a journalist to find out why. Just explain why.
It's a difficult one.
Well, I mean, it's massive.
It's a very, very severe situation. So if you want to make sense of this complicated world, Sky News' new podcast, This Is Why, is your daily fix. One story every day, and we can find out why together. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city where there's a column of Russian armoury. I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul. Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from from both sides, and it's moving this way.
So, time to take another look through the papers. I'm joined this morning by Global Affairs correspondent at The Eye, Molly Blackall. So, welcome back to you, Molly. So, let's look at some of the other stories around. We looked at some of the front pages in the last hour, didn't we? This time, we're going to go inside the Mirror and their take on the current state of play between Iran and the US, with Donald Trump saying he's held back from a major assault, having warned that he was locked and loaded before, and he's taking a pause to allow talks to happen. But Iran's saying, no, they're not.
Yeah, I can't count actually how many times I have talked about this exact same story, seemingly, where the US says talks are on and then Iran says talks are off. But that's exactly what's happening once again. So the US said that it was holding off on a massive attack. It said it would have been the biggest since the World War II at one point, to enable these talks to go ahead with a view to ending the war in Iran. But now Iran has come out and said no such talks are happening whatsoever. So it's not quite clear what the state of play is.
Interestingly, I was talking to Michael Clark, a military analyst, earlier, and he said it's possible that both things are true, but they're talking about different levels of talk. So while Donald Trump says talks are going on at the moment, that's true in the sense that there will be low-level talks going on all the time. The Iranians might be referring to high-level, meaningful talks, and so they're saying they're not going on. So it's possible that both statements are true.
Totally. I think that's a really, really good point. And so much of this is information warfare. It's a war of words. It's all about optics and political rhetoric. And it's not necessarily always putting truth as the number one bit. It's about appealing to your own country and what you're wanting your public posturing to be. What is clear, certainly, is that a key sticking block here is over the Strait of Hormuz, which is that crucial shipping lane through which around 20% of the world's oil and gas transits. And since the start of the war, Iran has sort of realised, really, that it might not be able to beat the US on military might, but it has this crucial bargaining chip, and it's not letting go. It's basically blockaded the Strip and really reduced the amount of shipping that can travel through. So on Sunday, just 8 ships passed through compared to more than 100 before the war. And that's having a real world impact internationally. It's spiking oil prices. It's troubling the global economy.
We've seen BP's profits up this morning.
Yes, exactly. So costs are rising and people will be feeling that at the petrol pump here in the UK as well. And Iran knows that. So it's going to hang on to this until the bitter end. But, I think it's important to remember, as this kind of geopolitical wrangling is going on at the highest levels, the death toll from this war is still going up. The Pentagon has just updated its casualty figures on the US side. It's now 624 US soldiers reported to have been wounded and 18 killed. Of course, the figure could be higher. And it's unclear on the Iranian side, but certainly into the thousands there as well. So the more this kind of spat continues, the more this war of words continues, people in Iran, in Lebanon, are not seeing a resolution to this conflict.
And every time there are threats of further strikes, the oil price goes up. And every time there's the announcement that there's a pause, it goes down again. But Donald Trump will certainly want it to be lower at the time of the midterm elections in November. So there's a certain time pressure there, isn't there?
Definitely. I mean, polling indicates overwhelmingly that the US public does not support this war. Certainly in the UK, there's been quite good support for Keir Starmer's decision, as it was then, not to kind of follow the US into that conflict. And yeah, ahead of those all-important midterm elections, which I think are in November this year, Trump is going to be having to bring this to some sort of conclusion, you would think, to clear that off his slate for that all-important vote. And at the moment, it seems he just can't do it.
Let's move on to domestic politics, because inside The Telegraph, they pick up on the fact that Nigel Farage, at his press conference yesterday, when he was actually talking about the small boats issue, was asked about whether or not he'd pick up on Rupert Lowe's offer of some kind of a pact, a coming together, he of Restore Britain, of course. How far did that get?
It's not quite clear. It depends really who you ask and where you look and at what time of the day you look. This has been a very long-standing spat. We're talking about battles. This is one at home between two politicians of relatively similar stripes, but very different, seemingly, sort of personal opinions. So Rupert Lowe was obviously a part of Reform. He got booted out last year, made his own party, Restore. And since then, Restore has been kind of eating into Reform's vote. And that is going to be a problem for Nigel Farage. There has been some discussion of a potential pact between the two, not a merger of the two parties, although that might seem natural in some ways, but more of an agreement to sort of stand down in seats where they might sort of eat into the vote. And we have seen evidence of that already in the Makerfield by-election, which of course propelled Andy Burnham to number 10 Downing Street. Reform came second, Restore came third. It's quite hard not to mix them up, actually. And Farage said after that that he thought that Restore had actually eaten into their vote and sort of split that vote. So that's what the two parties are going to be likely trying to explore, ways of avoiding that happening on a national scale at the next general election.
OK, and I think Nigel Farage talked about picking up the phone to Rupert Lowe, but Rupert Lowe says that hasn't happened and hasn't been very polite about him online, I think.
No.
So we'll see where that goes.
Seems quite a long way off a kind of natural alliance there. They still seem to be spatting on social media, at least.
Yes, exactly. Take us to The Guardian front page, because this is our main story today, and it's the news that we got late last night about exemptions to the early release scheme for prisoners, something that has caused a certain amount of consternation, certainly amongst victims groups, but now the government announcing some exemptions today.
Exactly. So, yeah, as you say, this has been really controversial as a policy. It was brought in to try and ease the overcrowding crisis in prisons a couple of years ago. At that point, they were really reaching capacity, and the feeling was that some prisoners needed to be released earlier than they otherwise would have been to free up that prison space. I think it is important to note that it is normal for prisoners to spend a portion of their sentence in the community. They get monitored by places like the probation service. That used to be about half, and the idea was to reduce that so that they were out more quickly. Andy Burnham, really one of his earliest kind of policy announcements when he got into government, said that he would announce a review of this, he would pause this policy until he'd had a look at it. And today we seem to be seeing the results of that. So he has reduced it in that some are now not going to be eligible for that scheme, but there are still plenty of offenders who are going to be released early. And Andy Burnham seems quite conflicted about that. He says in his statement on this, you know, he sort of wanted to go further with this, but basically it just isn't possible to maintain the kind of operational capabilities of the prison system. But in reality, what it means is that some very high-profile cases now will be released early, not least the death of PC Andrew Harper, the policeman who was killed in 2019 while responding to a crime. Two of his killers, not all, will be eligible for release, it seems, under that scheme. And his widow has come out very strongly saying that this is a betrayal. She's not going to be able to forgive it. But it seems like Andy Burnham is in between a sort of rock and a hard place on this. It's clear he's not comfortable with the policy, but it seems like he feels he has no choice. It's either that or the system gets overwhelmed.
Well, exactly. And he would say that the Labour Party inherited a prison system really under pressure. When Keir Starmer took over 2 years ago, there was something like 100 places available in the prison. So Shabana Mahmood acted very quickly to announce details of an early release scheme. But inevitably, there are always going to be victims who feel deeply uncomfortable about it. I noticed there's also been a reaction from the Domestic Violence Commissioner as well, because they're not included in the exemptions. Really concerned about some perpetrators being released early there. They say these are people who are often very fixated on one individual, and so they have real concerns about reoffending, for example. So it's really difficult. And we were talking to the Justice Secretary a little bit earlier, and they made very clear that it was a really difficult decision, but didn't really explain why some were exempt and others not.
It's incredibly hard to know where that line would be and to predict those kind of reoffending risks. Of course, if people do reoffend within that time or breach their conditions, I'm sure action will be taken. But nonetheless, you can totally understand why for so many victims, this feels incredibly bruising after the ordeal they will have already been through. You know, to get that individual behind bars, to feel that that's being, you know, brought to an end early, I think must be incredibly difficult. And it seems like the government government recognises that too.
Well, that's right, and no doubt we will hear from a lot of victims and victims groups today, either ones that will benefit from the exemptions and they'll see perpetrators stay behind bars for a little bit longer, and those that are not exempted, and we'll see perpetrators starting to come out of prison from October now. It's been shifted back. It was due to start in September. It has been shifted back. Also questions about how the probation service will cope with the increased surveillance that's been promised as well, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, so many elements of the system are overwhelmed, and we see that replicated across public services, you know, the NHS, etc. And I think the problem that Andy Burnham is going to run up against in his quest to sort of reform these institutions is how quickly can that be done and at what cost, you know. I think most people have an appetite for kind of, you know, bettering the capabilities and the capacities of these systems, but in reality it's very hard to change.
Well, that's right, and it takes so long to build prisons, of course. There are other solutions being proposed, like perhaps freeing more women prisoners who some are deemed to be less of a risk to society, and perhaps using women's prisons as well, using some of the capacity there. So lots of other options that might be explored, but we'll just have to wait and see how they get to grips with that.
Exactly.
Let's move on to the Guardian. We were on the Guardian. That's another story on the front of the Guardian. It's this extraordinary picture, and we've seen a lot of pictures like this, haven't we, sadly, in recent weeks, of fires because of the very high temperatures, this one in Greece.
Yeah, and sadly, as you say, we're seeing scenes like this across Europe, including in the UK. You know, there was a really shocking statistic on the front page of the iPaper this morning, which said there's a wildfire in South Wales, which is now the size of 210 football pitches. Quite hard to conceive of something that large. There's a blaze in Suffolk as well, which has devastated a huge portion of the landscape. So it's not only in many places across Europe that many people might go on holiday and recognise from that, but it's also here at home. And sadly, you know, scientists are warning that the climate crisis means extreme weather events like this could become more common.
Exactly, and there's going to have to be a lot of adapting going on, isn't there? Let's turn finally to the Express this morning, and yeah, sorry, I've been nicking your papers.
Don't worry, you're welcome. Anytime, anytime.
There you go, it's back to you, sorry about that. A story about, I mean, it's an extraordinary and an awful story about a young boy who fell from a high balcony at the Tate Gallery. He was thrown from it, wasn't he? And he's now back home.
Yeah, I mean, it's a story that many people might remember, actually, from that period of time. And I think this shows the kind of long tail of these kind of stories. It was a horrific incident, very shocking when it happened. This young boy was thrown from the balcony. It was 100 feet that he fell. Remarkably, he survived. But he's been in hospital that entire time over that 7-year period. And I think in the news, as you will well know, it's very easy for things to move on very quickly. But for the people involved in these stories, it is their lives. And this has been, you know, running on for this family all that time since many of us last thought about this story. Thankfully, there is a degree of a happy ending here. He's recovering well. He's now been released from hospital and he's looking forward to going back to school back in France, where he lives, because they were just visiting London, the family, when this happened.
Yeah, well, some positivity there, though. What an awful ordeal he's been through. Thanks so much for your company this morning, Molly. It's been lovely to see you. Top stories coming up.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
I'm going to take you behind the scenes here for Election Night Live. They have gone up and up.
Big Sky News journalist.
Ed Conway. Sky News, is anyone going to talk to us? Mortgage rates did go up very sharply during your time in office. Here it is.
First off, just the scale of what we're looking at.
Our data shows it's been happening. Question is, why it hasn't been stopped.
Hello and a very good morning. It's 9 o'clock. This is Mornings with me, Anna Jones. Here's how things are looking. Andy Burnham waters down prison overcrowding plans with serious sexual offenders no longer eligible for early release. But killers can still be freed. Donald Trump says Iran has one last chance to make a peace deal, accusing the regime of being duplicitous. Major retailers on London's high streets to begin using police technology to help catch shoplifters. Also ahead, we're going to be discussing the ongoing pressure on FIFA's president Gianni Infantino with the organisation's former director of communications. Plus, Sky News is given rare access to the murder investigation of a young woman who went missing 4 years ago and whose body has never been found. Hello, very good morning. Thanks for being with us. Our top story here today, prisoners convicted of rape, serious child sexual offences and grooming will no longer be eligible for early release as part of watered-down plans to tackle overcrowding. Adult male prisons are currently at 98% capacity. The initial proposal from Keir Starmer would have allowed some of the most serious offenders to be freed. However, Andy Burnham said these changes are in response to public anger. In a statement, he said, "Keeping the public safe is my top priority. That's why I asked for an urgent review of the prisoner release scheme. I fully understand the anger, anxiety and distress that's been caused. I want to be honest, I wanted to go even further, as I know there will still be concerns about other offenders having their sentence shortened. But it's not possible without the prison system reaching capacity and collapsing, which would put public safety at much greater risk." Well, earlier we heard from the Justice Secretary, Alex Norris.
Frankly, the Prime Minister's expressed his anger. I would express how angry I am too at being in a situation where we're having to make significant changes that do have real impacts on people's lives so that we are able to have a functioning prison system. And I say, Anna, if we don't, the consequences of this are, were we not to make these changes, then we would run out of prison places in this October or November. I know that's difficult. I know that's created harm, and that's none of that, it's not Lizzie Harper's fault. And, I'm sorry that she's been put into this situation as a result. I genuinely am. But this is a decision we've had to take to make sure we have a functioning prison system.
Well, let's bring in Molly now. And also we're joined by the Victims Commissioner for England and Wales, Claire Waxman. Really interesting to get your take on this, Claire. But first, let's just find out from Molly some of the nuts and bolts of what's been announced this morning. So this early release scheme that had been announced earlier, put on pause by Andy Burnham, and now he's saying it's restarting, but with these exemptions. So talk us through what exactly is changing.
Yeah, exactly. So this was supposed to start in September. On September the 2nd, you were supposed to see about 10 tranches of around 6,000 offenders released at an earlier point in their sentence. The two main changes are that that's going to be delayed by a month to give probation some time to recalculate the sentences with exclusions in place for rape offenders, for serious child sexual offences and for grooming offenders. So they're the two sort of main changes. Some victims will be happy, I think, so we'll see this as sort of slight relief, given what they've been through. Some of them, though, saying that, questioning why is it that some offenders are not now going to be freed. Around 1,000 fewer people. It's going from about 6,000 to around 5,000 in those 10 tranches. And yet I have to have gone through the sort of justice system, not have confidence in the justice system, waited years and years for delays, and yet still I expect to have that sort of bolt from the blue letter coming from probation, perhaps informing me that my offender will be released early.
Yeah, and Claire Waxman, that is an issue, isn't it? Give us your reaction to the fact that the early release scheme will be going ahead a month later, albeit, but with these exemptions. What do you make of the government's move?
So I called for this pause and urgent review because as Victims Commissioner, I was not satisfied that victims were being properly considered in the process. I said it at the time that this legislation was going through Parliament. I was very concerned of the impact on victims. So I very much welcome that the Prime Minister listened and that he conducted this review. as he said, I mean, unfortunately, I think he's gone as far as he can go in relation to who can be excluded from that early release due to the prison capacity crisis that we have in this country. And sadly, too many victims will still pay the price. And on behalf of them, I know how upset and distressed they will be at that news today.
So you do understand that he couldn't extend the exemptions further, do you? Do you understand why he made the specific exemptions he did? As we were saying, it's rape, serious child sex and other grooming offences that are covered in the exemptions. Are they the right ones, do you think?
Well, look, I'm Victims Commissioner. I represent all victims and families bereaved by homicide. So, you know, for me, I can't say that these are right or wrong because I know how many victims will feel so distressed and upset today. For me, what's really important is what happens now. We've got that delay to October. That's a really critical window because we need probation to be ready. They need to conduct robust risk assessments. They need to engage with victims, understand their concerns and risks, and make sure there are robust safeguards in place to properly protect these victims who now have to face the awful reality that the offenders in their case will be coming out early. So it's really important that government and probation use this extra time wisely.
And I want to explore a little bit more with you about how those victims who don't benefit from these exemptions, how they will be feeling in a moment. But Molly, we did talk to somebody who was a victim of a grooming gang. Clearly, there are two offenders she was concerned that might be released early. They won't be now because of these exemptions. We spoke to her earlier, didn't we? Remind us of what she was telling us.
Yeah, that's right. So she had what I described before as that sort of bolt from the blue letter back in June informing her that a number of her offenders, her perpetrators, were set to be released come September, earlier in their sentence. She had a call last night to say that these exclusions are now in place. It's not been made 100% clear that necessarily applies to her perpetrators, but it's her belief that it will because these exclusions are in place. Her describing it as some light relief, but still wanting to see it extended, as you know, for the sake of other victims. Let's hear a flavour of what she had to say.
Many other survivors up and down the country was thinking, do we need to move towns? Do we need to rearrange our whole lives? You know, these men, these monsters, were sentenced for some of the most heinous crimes in our country, and they was about to be released early under the new release scheme, and survivors joining together, we've stopped that. But if they'd have not stopped and exempt these paedophiles and rapists from this early release scheme, then there'd have been so much more uproar and uncertainty in the communities.
So if that's the light relief for people like Sarah, you've now got many families, as I said, questioning why these exclusions can't be applied to their perpetrators. And I think chief among them are the family of PC Andrew Harper, who was killed in the line of duty, a police officer killed in the line of duty back in August 2019. Just worth reminding people, he was dragged for a mile behind a car, driven by three men along a country road while responding to a burglary in Berkshire in August 2019. Now, two of his killers could qualify for early release. They were sentenced to manslaughter, and so it means that they could be released at the halfway point rather than at the 2/3 point. One of them, it doesn't apply to this policy at all. He'll only be eligible for release on parole, but you can imagine incredibly distressing news for his family and Lizzie Harper, his wife. We've had a statement from her, and she said the killers of Andrew have shown no remorse. They robbed us of our future. They are vile criminals and they should remain in jail. To release them early from their already pitiful sentences is an affront to justice. The government and the justice system have not just let me down, they have added insult to injury. They are meant to be on our side. This is an utter betrayal, and it's what I will not be able to forgive or forget.
Those are really powerful words, aren't they, Claire Waxman? What would you say to Lizzie Harper this morning?
So it's heartbreaking, and I would say those are the same words I've heard repeatedly from victims since mid-June when they received this awful letter. I mean, it was appalling communication that really explained very little and has sent so many victims and families into this awful state of trauma and shock, and there's so much uncertainty. And many said to me, this feels like a betrayal, it's an injustice. You know, victims in this country already endure, as Molly says, incredibly long waits. They have to navigate very difficult, complex criminal justice systems that don't really respond well to their needs, and then we see this happening. And that's because successive governments have failed to invest in our criminal justice system. It has been mismanaged, chronically underinvested for so many years that we have victims and families now paying the price, and that makes me incredibly angry. And what I would say now to government and to this new Prime Minister, we have to bring criminal justice system up the agenda. It has to be a top priority for this country. We can't keep failing victims and families. You know, this should be the 10-year plan for Britain. The reform of the criminal justice system has to be at the top of this. We keep doing piecemeal reforms, but that doesn't work for victims. So we need to go much wider with strategic leadership across government, because otherwise I fear we will continue to see these issues rise up again and again for victims.
The government's today talking about a new package of support for victims backed by £10 million, provide better trauma-informed connections and contact with people. Do you have faith in that? Will that make a difference?
It'll make a little bit of a difference. I mean, that's what I called for. It's why I asked for the review, because I realised there was nothing being invested into our support services. Our support services are already stretched, struggling to meet demand. And then they were getting all these extra phone calls from victims that had received this communication in mid-June from probation that had re-traumatised them. And the support services weren't able to respond. So I'm pleased to see some investment going into support services and a helpline as well, which will be up and running from October, that anyone impacted can call to understand what that means for them and get signposted into the right support. But again, it's always piecemeal. And I go back to the same issue. We have to see the criminal justice system reformed as a whole. We're looking at, the prison crisis now, but we are shunting the pressures from prison onto a probation service that I question whether they have the capacity and the ability to actually respond and manage that risk in community. And then it'll come back to policing and back to our courts. And the poor victims and families pay the price.
Well, Claire Waxman, Victims Commissioner for England and Wales, we really appreciate you coming in and giving us your views, and hopefully you'll come back in the weeks and months ahead to fill us in on how victims are dealing with all of this in the months ahead. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Molly, thank you to you. We will see you again a little bit later. So more on the story shortly, but first, footage has emerged at the moment that a drone crashed into a busy beach resort in southern Russia yesterday, killing 7 people. And I should say the video that you're about to see shows the moment up to the strike as well as the aftermath. So the footage shows the drone falling to the ground, followed by a loud explosion. 3 of those killed were reported to be children, and 40 others were injured in that attack. Donald Trump has issued what he's calling a last chance for Iran to sign a peace deal. He's also accused the Iranian regime of being duplicitous after Tehran dismissed claims that they were involved in talks at all. Speaking at the Oval Office, Mr. Trump warned that this is the last chance for Iran to make a deal or risk escalation.
The talks are going along. We're going to hit them very hard yesterday, very, very hard, harder than any attack. I think I can say, General, from a point of knowledge, any attack since World War II, that's pretty big. This is the last chance. This is not something that, if it doesn't happen, this is the last chance for them to sign a good document.
Well, earlier I asked our security and defence analyst, Michael Clark, why the US and Iran can't agree on whether or not talks are being held.
When Donald Trump says we have talks going on, well, there are communications going on all the time. And so at the moment, Qatar, Oman are quite active. So is Pakistan. At other times, Egypt and Turkey have been very active. So there's lots of countries behind the scenes who are keeping channels open, and American low-level officials are speaking to Iranian low-level officials, and the Iranians are speaking to the Omanis. So he's right when he says, in a way, talks are going on, but at a very low level. The Iranians are also right when they say no talks are taking. The big hitters are involved. I mean, when you see Arachi, the foreign minister, or Pezeshkian, the president, when you see them go to some sort of meeting and J.D. Vance turns up because Trump sends him, or Marco Rubio and Arachi, the 2 foreign ministers, when they get together, that's the sort of talks the Iranians are speaking about. So there's this constant sort of process of communication, but we're not near anything that looks like going back to the memorandum of understanding where they thought they had the outline of an agreement to keep on talking. We're still a bit of a way away from that.
But do you think we're near to those high-level talks?
Well, probably nearer to it than people think we are, because Trump can just order Rubio to... And I think the Iranians... I don't think they will resist talks if the Americans look as if they're sincere about it. But the Iranians have got the whip hand here. They know that they have the agenda, because the MOU that we're talking about from a month ago was very pro-Iranian. I mean, why the Americans signed up to it, we will discover in the fullness of time. But it gave the Iranians more or less everything they wanted, and quite a lot of sweeteners as well. It gave the Americans virtually nothing. And, of course, the Iranians will go back to that if Trump comes to it. But Trump is in this position now. He's got to go big or go home. Last week, CENTCOM, Central Command, Brad Cooper, Admiral Brad Cooper, the commander of CENTCOM, he gave Trump options to really extend the war. And that's what Trump was talking about. We're locked and ready to go, he said. And Sky's Data and Forensics, last week, we tracked, they, with me talking to them, they tracked an 80% increase in American military traffic from America bouncing through Britain and Germany and bouncing onto the Middle East.
They really were ready.
They really were ready. This spike in military traffic was terrific. It was terrifically interesting. And they were ready to go. And Brad Cooper briefed Trump last week, according to American sources, on these are the options for going big. We can really, if you want us to, we can go big. So he's now faced with the idea, go big or go home. Either make all-out war on Iran, with what that will imply, and the Iranians will then go hard on attacking all of the Gulf states, and Trump won't do that. I'm sure he won't. So he's faced with go big or go home. He's looking for ways to go home, but he's got to go back to negotiating the terms of the MOU, which are very unfavourable to him. And
the real sense is he does, as you say, want an off-ramp. He doesn't want to keep the fighting going, especially with elections looming and the oil price going up every time there's a strike and going down when he says there's a pause.
Yeah, whenever it gets to $100, he gets scared. I mean, when the oil price, I think today it's something like 87...
85 or 86.
85, 86, something like that. Yeah. Obviously, it changes every day. But when it goes towards 95, 98, 99, then he gets frightened and starts to think a bit differently. And we're 13 weeks away now from the November midterm elections, and he's burning up the weeks. He's burning time between now and then.
Have you got a theory about how this could all wrap up?
I think it will wrap up with an agreement on the MOU, which, with a couple of tweaks, might be acceptable to Tehran, and Trump will have to take it away and pretend that it's a great victory. It won't be, but that's what he'll have to pretend. We said from the very beginning of this war, at some point he has to declare victory and go home, declare victory and leave. And that's still the situation. From the 7th of April, when they had the original ceasefire, I mean, he lost the war that day because military action wasn't going to achieve anything else politically. That's the conclusion they came to. Since then, we've been discussing the terms upon which America declares victory and leaves. It's not much of a victory. Everything is worse because of this war. But he will have to pretend that it's a great victory. Some of his supporters will believe that because they've given him papal infallibility, but the rest of the world won't.
Michael Clark there. Now let's return to our top story about prisoner early releases. Someone else with strong thoughts on this is the Labour MP Jess Phillips, the former Minister for Safeguarding and Violence Against Women and Girls. Very good morning to you, Jess Phillips. Thanks so much for talking to us this morning. Correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, you'd called for some curbs on the early release scheme. So what do you make of the exemptions that we've had announced this morning, exemptions for those jailed for rape, serious child sex offences and grooming?
So, look, I had called for all child sex offences to be taken from this. So, actually, the government have gone a bit further and said that all rape, including rape of adults, will be included in the exemption. So, I am pleased with that. However, what I also called for was a delay in the scheme starting, which the government have announced, to ensure that all of the proper risk and safeguards can be put in place for all of those, regardless of what their crime type is as part of this scheme, who are perpetrators of violence against women and girls, whether that's domestic abuse or sexual violence or stalking. For example, there have been people in prison who have stalked me, for example. So this isn't academic to me, to ensure that those decisions about release and sentence length are made on the basis of risk. And currently the system does not do that very well.
We spoke to the Justice Secretary a little bit earlier on, who gave us a kind of idea of the numbers. About 6,000 prisoners were due for early release. Now there'll be 5,000 with these exemptions. That's still an awful lot of perpetrators of crimes going free early, and including potentially some who've been found guilty of manslaughter and of domestic violence crimes. So what would your message be to the victims of those crimes, finding out that the perpetrators of the crimes against them are still likely to get out early?
Well, look, so again, I include myself into that cohort, what I would say is that the situation with a growing number of domestic abusers and sexual violence perpetrators being incarcerated at the same time as a sort of crumbling prison estate and situation in prisons means that we need to be able to lock people up. However, what they should be absolutely entitled to as victims in those crimes is to be completely and utterly part of that process and walk through it, and for their risk, the risk to them. So in domestic abuse cases, one of the main problems that we have is that so many people re-offend with the same victim. It is the nature of that crime, where it is different to fraudsters getting out. There is a really specific violence against women and girls issue that needs now, before this scheme starts to operate in October, and I have spoken to the ministers with regards to this. We need to make sure that those victims feel that they are as safe as they possibly can be, and that the system is on their side. It's not their responsibility to worry about the numbers or failures of politicians for decades before. It is only their responsibility to deal with, to feel safe and feel part of the system. And currently, I would say the processes for that are not in place.
Well, Jess Phillips, we don't have a huge amount of time, so I am going to have to let you go, but really appreciate your reaction to this morning's news. Former Safeguarding Minister, of course. Jess Phillips, thanks very much indeed. We are going to get more on this story and more reaction in just a moment. I'll be talking to the Shadow Minister for Policing and Crime, Matt Vickers, after the break.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party.
I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration.
Sky News get the full story first.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist.
A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan had the right to respond.
You're like, what?
Historic day here today. Congratulations, this is a huge moment. But what happens now?
So let's get more now to the government announcement of exemptions to its early release scheme for prisoners. We can get the reaction of the Conservatives now. I'm joined by the Shadow Minister for Policing and Crime, Matt Vickers. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for talking to us. So the government has announced today that rape, serious child sex and other grooming offences are going to be excluded from their early release scheme. Do you welcome those exemptions?
Well, I think that more importantly, actually, it's who they aren't excluding. You talk about killers. We've heard about Andrew Harper's killers, PC Andrew Harper's killers, a terrible, terrible crime. His family, who fought for justice, are now going to be denied justice as those people are released. And as you said, they're serious child sexual offenders. Well, any sexual offence against a child is serious in my book, and anybody who perpetrates such a thing should be locked up for their full sentence. We should not be releasing people who commit child sexual offences early. We should not be releasing people who kill people early. To anybody out there who has a family member who's been subject to such an awful crime, they should not be getting a letter from the government telling them that person is being released early. It is appalling, it is disgraceful, it is complete injustice.
Well, yes, and the Prime Minister did say that he had wanted to go further. He recognises that people will be worried about other offenders being released, but he says he's made the changes and has gone as far as is possible without putting the prison system at risk of collapse, which would, he said, put the public at greater risk. He says he has no choice.
Well, the reality is there has been choices in the last couple of years, because actually in the last year, the number of places in our prisons, despite the fact they've released 60,000 people early already, has gone down by 450. There are 450 less places in our prisons, despite the fact we're paying record levels of tax. We are not getting those prison places. But
when Labour took over from the Tories, prisons were at 99% capacity. At the month that they took over, I think there were only 100 free places in the male prison system.
The last government made decisions that affected the pressure on prison capacity. It made a decision during the pandemic not to release people en masse early. That was the right decision. It made the decision to toughen up sentences for sexual and violent offences. That was the right thing to do. And
but still, the prisons were still full to bursting, weren't they? And something had to be done. So if you were in the position now that the government is in, what would you do?
The last government also made the decision to embark on the biggest prison building programme since the Victorian era. Places were being built.
OK, well, let's just look at the record. 14 years. I think the Tories shut 23 prisons, is that right? And I think there were 50 net prison places gained under the Tories.
That's not true.
OK, well, so tell me what the figures are.
We embarked on the biggest prison building programme since the Victorian era. 14,000 places were built. More places were planned. We had planning permission. Things were being built. What's happened since then is that the number has been reduced by this Labour government, who've released 60,000 people early, is being reduced by 450. There were 3,500 in the process of being built that have been subject to an 18-month delay, no work on them, because this government allowed a contract to fall out of kilter. Things are going the wrong way. When you start releasing people, 60,000 people have already been released early, you need to prioritise prison building. We're paying record levels of tax. There's less police on our streets, less teachers in our schools, and less places in our prisons. To be a priority. This government's priority is spend on welfare, not take care of the British people it is supposed to be protecting.
The government says that they are building prisons. Obviously, they take a while to come online. So my question again to you is, what would you do in this situation, given that we are up to, I think it's 97 or 98% capacity at the moment? If they carry on as now, prisons would be at full capacity by November. So what would the Tories do if they were in power now?
Three things that the government needs to do to deal with the prison capacity issue. The first thing is to leave the ECHR, deport foreign national offenders. There are about 10,000 places in our prison service being taken up by foreign nationals who should have been removed from this country. Secondly, we'd manage it properly. The fact there's been an 18-month delay in the building of 3,500 prisons is not acceptable. Somebody needs to be held to account for that in government. It's not the way forwards. And we need to prioritise building those places. In the next year, the budget for welfare, for benefits, is going up by £18 billion. We need to spend things on the things that matter to people out there. Keeping these awful, vile criminals in prison matters to people out there. It should be a priority for this government.
OK, Matt Vickers, we appreciate your time this morning. Thanks very much indeed for coming on. So let's bring Molly back in there. And Matt Vickers really sort of defending the Tories' record on prisons, but it has been a problem that's faced previous governments as well as this current one, hasn't it?
Yeah, massively so. This has been going on for years. Matt Vickers there sort of making the point that the previous Conservative government didn't want to do these sort of last resort emergency release type measures. The reality is that both successive governments have been doing exactly that in different forms, but in sort of emergency temporary sort of format. What we've now got is legislation. It's become law off the back of the sentencing review, which was a long time in the making, and led by a former Conservative Justice Secretary in David Gauke. And the changes that we're talking about today, Andy Burnham now making certain exclusions for rapists, for groomers, and for serious child sexual offences. But the changes that we're talking about today came about because of that review, which was commissioned by the government, commissioned and implemented by Keir Starmer. Andy Burnham, within days, then made these changes. Light relief, as we've been hearing throughout the morning, to some victims of rape and serious child sexual offences. But there is a lot of ambiguity still. You know, the Victims Commissioner saying before, Sarah Wilson, a victim who we spoke to in the last hour, saying, define serious child sexual offences. In their view, all child sexual offences are serious. So there's still ambiguity on that front. And there are lots of victims this morning who will wake up to the news that they've seen exclusions in place for some people and not for others. And they will be questioning, if you can do it for them, why not for me? So I think you've got dividing lines between victims, and you've got the pragmatism of the prison estate. We've been hearing from Matt Vickers there, but also from guests throughout the morning. The male adult estate is at 98% capacity. That is not the 100 free spaces that we had 2 summers ago, and we saw, you know, police custody suites being used as alternative to cell spaces. But you're looking at about 1,800 spaces free in the male estate, which sounds like a lot, but you have a sort of a riot that we had a couple of summers ago. You have, you know, those sorts of events that take place, and the situation quickly becomes very fluid, and the headroom is not there. So that was the government's argument. That is Andy Burnham's argument for not being able to go further, but you're still going to have quite a lot of pretty upset people this morning, I think.
Absolutely. So much reaction, and we will be hearing from lots of different groups throughout the day. But Molly, for the moment, thank you so much. Let's bring you some of the other stories of the day now. And BP's second quarter profits have more than doubled from the same time a year ago, beating analysts' expectations. The oil giant reported an underlying replacement cost profit of $5.73 billion. Oil majors have seen higher returns as the Middle East conflict contributes to elevated oil and gas prices. The death toll from twin earthquakes that hit Venezuela in June has risen to 6,125, according to new figures from the country's government. Nearly 61,000 people were hospitalised. Efforts to rebuild and clear the damage are ongoing, but less than a quarter of all debris has been removed. Now, here, major retailers on London's high streets are going to begin using police technology to help catch shoplifters. Well, Graham is here to tell us a little bit more. And we've had a lot about shoplifting, and lots of retailers really upset about what they say is an increase in the number of their things that are being nicked.
Yeah.
So what exactly is this technology that might be being used?
Yeah, so this is a new system, essentially, new software, which would allow shops to submit CCTV footage, witness statements, other evidence directly to officers. So, for example, previously, Police had to wait up to 28 days sometimes for CCTV to come through. Now it can be in a matter of minutes. When I say now, obviously, this is just a trial. It's happening in London across 6 boroughs today. It's being expanded to another 7 boroughs because it appears to be working at least a little. So according to the Met, in cases of shoplifting, normally a charge or a caution is brought in around 7% of cases, so not many at all.
It's low.
Where this trial has been taking place or has been involved, a charge or a caution is being made in 30% of cases, so nearly 1 in 3. It's been rolled out to shops like Tesco, Boots, Greggs, Holland and Barrett, whose bosses have complained about the impact of the surge in retail crime. They've been complaining, they're saying we need some kind of help. Police say it has helped charge a teenager who was involved in a shoplifting spree where £100,000 worth of stuff was taken. One man has been banned from every Holland and Barrett, Greggs and BP in England and Wales after stealing £4,000 worth of goods. These are individual cases, but it's a staggering challenge. More than 500,000 cases each year. Bosses have been asking for help. This may be the police starting to come up with an answer.
Really interesting. We'll see where that goes. Graham, thanks very much indeed. Do stay with us. We've got more in just a moment on our special report into the murder investigation of a young woman who went missing 4 years ago. That's next. Now, NHS staff say they've experienced a noticeable rise in racism from patients over the last 18 months. A new poll conducted by the Society of Radiographers found that staff reported being called derogatory names and patients refusing to be treated by non-white staff. They say it's led some workers to accept racism as part of the job. Well, joining us now is Paul Awa, who's a diagnostic radiographer originally from Nigeria. He joins us now. A very good morning to you. Thanks so much for talking to us. So this survey by the Society of Radiographers is pretty shocking, isn't it? They found that racism has got worse in the last 18 months. Does that come as a surprise to you? Tell us a little bit about your own experience.
Well, for me, it's a bit shocking to experience racism in a country as accommodating as the UK is. I joined the NHS 5 years ago after practicing in Nigeria for 15 years. So totally, I've been practicing for 20 years as a diagnostic radiographer. When I joined the NHS during the pandemic, the intention, the goal was to help as much as possible to support the service in terms of, helping people not to die as much as we were losing people during the pandemic. But were celebrated as heroes then. In the last year and a half, the rhetoric surrounding immigration has changed. And this is due to, I believe, the increase in far right movement, not necessarily only in the UK, because I know it has increased in Italy, it's increasing in France, in Croatia, in Sweden, and some other Scandinavian countries. So in the past year and a half, the rhetoric has changed, where migrant NHS workers are seen as soft targets by patients who, instead of, blaming the cost of living on something else, see migrant workers as leeches who are feeding off the system and depriving them of their benefits or their ability to access services, whether in the NHS, whether in GP, whether in their dentist practitioners and all that. So there've been a rise actually in the last 18 months.
And how does it make you feel? Your job is to help people, to heal people. So how does it make you feel when you're spoken to in that way?
We are beginning to normalize it as something we can deal with and just move on. But even though you are able to normalize it as a person, doesn't mean it should be allowed to continue, because it has a debilitating effect on you mentally, emotionally, psychologically. Imagine being called a frog, being called a monkey, being seen as being an imposter. You shouldn't really be here. Are you really qualified? Have you ever seen maybe a CT scanner? Have you ever seen an MRI machine before? Have you ever done X-ray? Do you have this in Nigeria? Do you have this in Africa? And all that. Meanwhile, to qualify as a radiographer in Nigeria is much, much more tedious than it is here in the UK, because radiography in Nigeria is a 5-year course. Apart from your 5 years of study, you must do 1 year compulsory internship or housemanship. After that, you must do 1 year compulsory paramilitary service. So in total, 7 years. Here in the UK, it's just 3 years to qualify. So having qualified and come up with so much experience and come to support and help to, bring up the next set of cohort students to be able to run a service as important as the NHS, and to be seen as an imposter and to make you feel, as if you don't belong, to make you feel as if you are not wanted, it doesn't help at all. But we keep putting up with it. Why do we have to put up with it? Because people are worried to escalate this, to report this. We have various platforms set up by different organizations in across NHS trusts where you can report this. There is the Equality, Diversity and Inclusivity group. There's the Black and Minority Ethnic Nationalities group. There is the Race, Equality and Cultural Heritage group. There is the Freedom to Speak Up group. But we don't want to stir the hornet's nest. We don't know who we are reporting to, if they will really listen to our side of the story, if they will really believe us, if it's not the word of the patient against you. The patient doesn't come up in public to call you, you are a monkey, you are a frog. Perhaps you are in a cubicle trying to leave a cannula in, trying to crack a patient, trying to get information that will help you to, scan this patient and the rest. And the patient says this to you in front of you, you alone with the patient.
Sorry to interrupt.
Who will you believe in such circumstances? It might always be the word of the patient against yours.
Yeah. I'm so sorry that you've had these experiences. I think people watching will be really shocked to hear some of the treatment that you've had to experience, and I'm so sorry for that. Thank you so much for telling us a little bit about it. I think raising awareness is probably really important, and I hope you get the support and that change happens. But thank you so much for your time, Paul Arwell. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, Sky News has been given unique access to the murder investigation of a vulnerable young woman who went missing 4 years ago and whose body has never been found. Alicia Apostolov-Boyain's killer had a violent past and would go on to commit further violent crimes behind bars. Well, police admit that opportunities were missed and that may have avoided what happened to her. Our chief North of England correspondent, Greg Milam, has the story.
Is there anything you can tell me about Alicia's current whereabouts?
Can I take your full name, please?
Yeah, it's Alicia Apostolov-Boyain.
This is the story of a vulnerable young woman.
Someone has prevented Alicia from coming home to us.
And a man she trusted. A man who'd been violent in the past and would be again.
How Alicia's life was taken, we don't know.
This is the first time the full story is being told. And it's a story that's taken us from Manchester to County Durham to Derbyshire in search of the truth about what happened to Alicia. Along the way, we find tragic missed opportunities that might have prevented what happened to Alicia.
I would ask him to clear his conscience.
And we find she wasn't the only victim. So what did happen to Alicia? Why was no one able to prevent it? And what did that man go on to do, even when he was in prison? You can watch our full report on the Sky News app and YouTube channel, because one big question remains. Where is Alicia?
So it's a really powerful story told by Greg. He mentioned the app. As he said, you can get more details there. You can also scan the QR code now that you can see on screen to get more, his full report as well as other details, also on our website. Now then, coming up after the break, we're going to be discussing the future of FIFA President Gianni Infantino. That's coming up next.
First Minister, how are you?
Good morning. Good morning.
Nice to see you.
How are you feeling? Looking forward to getting into the parliamentary chamber.
Are you any further forward to making a decision?
No, it's an important day today.
All of the claims were in line with my parliamentary duties, so I'm making that clear to you, Conor.
He was a Scot through and through.
He was a very good politician.
Alex Salmond was controversial, he was a disruptor, but above all, he was respected.
Will you resign if you lose this week?
Again, I'm not planning to, of course, lose the vote of no confidence. I'm planning to win that vote of no confidence.
His face said it all.
My intention to stand down as party leader.
This is now a storm with deadly consequences. How are they feeling?
They're a bit scared at the minute.
We've been told to evacuate.
How are you feeling?
Devastated.
Hundreds of homes were wiped out by flooding. I'm Conor Gillis, Sky's Scotland correspondent.
It was probably the darkest time in my life.
Scott is 5 years sober after a cocaine addiction left him close to death. Scotland has a shameful record, worse than England, the worst in Europe.
Why not just say you failed? Because then you might get more respect from families who've lost loved ones.
This is where one of the UK's most prolific rapists thought he'd got away with murder.
Sky News can reveal that former sex workers had told police he was sexually violent.
My Emma.
Free wherever you get your news.
It's over, isn't it?
The Americans say he is Rossi, a fraudster.
This has been one of the most bizarre cases ever heard in a courtroom in this country.
A dangerous murderer.
Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive Andrew Ennis after this?
She said she can forgive him, but as long as he's behind bars.
By doing the right thing, it's destroyed your life.
They terrorised me. They intimidated me.
I'm so grateful.
Sky News, the full story first.
I bet right now
you often find yourself asking why. Why was a certain decision taken? Why did something happen? Why did they say or do that? I'm Neil Patterson, and it's my job as a journalist to find out why. Just explain why.
It's a difficult one.
Well, I mean, it's massive.
It's a very, very severe situation.
So if you want to make sense of this complicated world, Sky News' new podcast, This Is Why, is your daily fix. One story every day, and we can find out why together. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
I'm going to take you behind the scenes here for Election Night Live. They have gone up and up.
Big Sky News journalist.
Ed Conway, Sky News, is anyone going to talk to us?
Mortgage rates did go up very sharply during your time in office.
Here it is.
First off, just the scale of what we're looking at.
Our data shows it's been happening. Question is why it hasn't been stopped.
Now, with pressure mounting on FIFA President Gianni Infantino, Sky News understands that the English FA is to write to FIFA withdrawing its support for Infantino's re-election as president next year. That'll follow the lead of the Welsh FA, which became the world's first football association to withdraw its support following Mr Infantino's attempt to sell off stakes in the World Cup. Well, let's get some reaction to this pressure that seems to be building on Gianni Infantino. Joining us now is FIFA's former Director of Communications from 1984 to 1995, Guido Tognoni. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for talking to us this morning. The pressure does seem to be building, doesn't it, on Gianni Infantino? What do you think? Do you think he will lose his job?
Look, we have to face the fact that probably now we are like in a boxing fight of heavyweights. I think we are in the round 9 or 10. The enemies of Gianni Infantino, they have to keep the pace up, and Infantino has to try to recover it within the next 2 rounds. So it is still an open fight. But I have to say that if UEFA can keep the pressure now, if they can stay as a bloc, if they still have the support of Asia and of North and Central America, it will be very difficult for Infantino to continue. The question is, what will he do until March 18, when the next Congress should take place, or will somebody ask for an extraordinary Congress, which would take place much earlier, and then the pressure on an extraordinary Congress would be much bigger than on the normal one, which takes place in more than half a year.
And you say it's like a battle of the heavyweights. I mean, is Gianni Infantino still up for the fight, despite all the criticism coming his way? Or do you think there's a chance that he'll recognise the pressure and step down? Is that a possible scenario?
You know, he can step down. It's the only possibility, because we have no impeachment procedures in FIFA and other things. I don't think that he will step down. He's very courageous. He's not a stupid guy. He has some support, and if he can get the support of the smaller associations, which dream from the big money, and the president's dream from a new Mercedes, you know, then probably he could make quite a lot of votes, and could get quite a lot of support. But the timing is very essential. The timing for UEFA is very essential. UEFA tries now to make a litigation case. This makes especially the lawyers happy. I don't think that a big result will come out, but all is a matter of the better timing now in the next few weeks.
I mean, you've worked for FIFA, you've worked closely with previous leaders. How pressurised a job is it? How tough do you have to be? Do you have to accept that you're not going to please everybody all the time anyway?
Could you repeat, because I don't have a perfect line? Sorry to ask again.
I was talking far too quickly as well. I was saying, from your experience working at FIFA, does the man at the top have to be very tough? Do they have to accept that they're not going to please all the nations all the time anyway?
You know, this is one of the problems, is that the man on the top has too much power. He is hard to control. And we know from former presidents like Havelange and Blatter, and now Infantino, they always have the temptation to abuse their power. And this was the case now with Infantino. He's a lonely man, but he is still elected. He's still elected, and he is still in charge, you know, and he still has his office. The problem of him is that he has his closest allies in FIFA, in the administration, are separating from him. and they jump on the other side, you know, and they can deliver UEFA with a lot of information. As you know, UEFA has asked Infantino to stop to destroy any documents and any evidence which could be used against him. You know, maybe it's a little bit a naive request from UEFA and some lawyers, but we will see what comes out of this. So the pressure is big, the pressure is very strong, but it didn't destroy yet Infantino.
And is there one candidate in particular that you think could challenge Infantino and gain support globally?
There is not a candidate yet, and this is one of the challenges of the challengers. FIFA should stop now to cult the FIFA presidency position. You know, we have to find a new way for FIFA. We have to reorganize FIFA. FIFA should maybe think about a rotation system for the president, so that every single confederation could deliver a president for a certain time. I think the chance now with this Infantino case is that FIFA should review their whole situation, should review the distribution of power, and especially they should not now elect somebody who would like to stay a long time in power. Maybe they find a transition person who is really dedicated to serve football and not to serve himself. This is not easy, but there is today not a name yet in place which we can say that he would be the favorite.
Yeah, I think we're going to be talking about this for a few weeks yet, aren't we? But Guido Tognoni, we really appreciate your take on events. Really interesting to get your analysis. Thank you so much.
Thank you too. Bye-bye.
Let's take a look now at the weather.
I hope we haven't forgotten anything.
Travel insurance, I tick that box.
Yeah, but remember what you forgot last year.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News Weather.
Well, this week will bring much-needed rain, but probably nothing significant in the drought-stricken south. Scotland will see prolonged early rain becoming confined to the north this morning, with locally heavy and potentially thundery showers following into southern parts. Elsewhere, there'll be sunny spells and a scattering of showers, some torrential and thundery. They'll be concentrated in the west, leaving eastern England mainly dry. Southern parts won't be quite as hot as yesterday. So showers will become more widespread later, but East Anglia and South East England will hardly see any, while the west of Ireland will tend to dry up, and do expect some further showers overnight.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News Weather.